Chapter 1184. The blood giant's severed arm grew back, as if it was completely unharmed. However, everyone keenly sensed that the blood giant's body had shrunk significantly as the arm grew back. The regeneration of the severed arm was clearly consuming its foundation, and the consumption was not small. This made everyone's eyes light up. There was no need to communicate. Everyone present was experienced in battle and naturally knew what to do at this time. Therefore, they all attacked the blood giant's 6 arms, and some even came up with new ideas to attack the blood giant's legs and head. The scene became even more lively than before. In the previous battle, because they had taken into consideration the consumption of each other, the cultivators of the 9 prefectures were more or less restrained when they attacked. They were afraid that they would consume too much energy and not be able to defeat the blood giant. If that really happened, the 9 prefectures' camp would most likely end in defeat. However, they no longer held back because they had found a better way to wear down the enemy. The blood giant probably did not expect that its 6 arms, which were originally its unique advantage, would become the key to victory for the cultivators of the 9 prefectures. In an instant, the hundreds of top cultivators of the 9 prefectures were divided into 9 battle groups. They each attacked one of the blood giant's arms, legs, or neck. The body and weapon cultivators charged at the front, attracting the blood giant's attention. They blocked the blood giant's counterattack, while the others activated their secret techniques and spiritual treasures, displaying their own methods to their heart's content. Loud rumbling sounds continued, and multicolored lights flew in all directions. Under such a situation, even the blood giant was somewhat tired of resisting. It focused all its energy on resisting the attacks of the cultivators of the 9 prefectures. Lu Yi suddenly became relaxed. Originally, because of the suppression of the divine attribute, the blood giant took care of him. However, how could it spare any energy to pay attention to Lu Yi now? The scene was still thrilling. While the cultivators of the 9 prefectures were wildly attacking, they also had to guard against the blood giant's counterattack. Even the body and weapon cultivators charging at the front were unwilling to be hit by the blood giant's attacks. Everyone's figure was nimbly moving. The battle continued, and another arm of the blood giant was cut off. The ones who succeeded were still the 2 sword masters who were working together. The killing power of the sword cultivators was evident. As the arm flew out, another rain of blood fell from the sky. When the blood giant grew another arm, its body had shrunk once more. Everyone saw the hope of victory, and their attacks became even more ruthless. At this moment, the blood giant opened its mouth and let out an indescribable roar. This was the first time it had spoken since its birth. The furious roar was so fierce that it was deafening. What accompanied it was boundless blood that gushed out from its mouth. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a sea of blood, and a vicious aura swept out in all directions. The blood river technique was the blood clan's specialty. As long as the blood race's cultivation had reached a certain level, they would be able to use this secret technique that combined both attack and defense. The blood race's experts were also used to using the blood river technique against their enemies because it was very easy to create a geographical advantage. One, it didn't make sense that the blood giant didn't know how to use the blood arts that the vampires were proficient in. The reason why it didn't use it was probably because its body was too big. It knew that even if it used it, it would not be able to hide its body with the help of the blood river. However, it was now at an absolute disadvantage, so it had no choice but to use this secret technique. Lu Yi had been waiting for this moment. His existence was the only way to suppress the blood giant, so he didn't do anything other than spreading his own sea of blood. Thus, he didn't make any unnecessary movements. Even when the blood giant targeted his attacks, he mainly dodged. In this kind of battlefield, it wasn't good for him to put himself in danger. If he was accidentally injured or disabled, then there would be no one to suppress the blood giant. However, it would be a different story if the blood giant used the blood river technique. As the blood giant's blood river spread out, the sea of blood that had been hanging above Yuzhu Peak suddenly spread out. In the blink of an eye, the entire peak was enveloped in the color of blood, and not a single person could be seen. Their blood rivers collided, and waves splashed everywhere. Lu Yi used all his strength to forcefully merge his sea of blood with the other parties. It was the same method he had used to deal with the blood race's holy seed. The blood giant had no choice but to use the blood river technique. It probably didn't expect that such an action would hasten its death. That was because after their blood rivers merged, Lu Yi immediately activated the power of his talent tree and wildly devoured everything around him. He didn't need to do this when dealing with the holy seed because it was just a suppression of the holy seed's holiness. When the holy seeds couldn't take it anymore, he only needed to kill the holy seed. However, against the blood giant, pure suppression of the holy seed wasn't enough to win. The main purpose of this battle was to exhaust it. The more he devoured with the help of his talent tree, the more the blood giant would be exhausted. Originally, the cultivators of the 9 prefectures would be in such an environment. They would be restrained everywhere. However, with Lu Yi secretly guiding them, the situation was different. Originally, the cultivators of the 9 prefectures would be restrained everywhere in such an environment. However, with Lu Yi secretly guiding them, the situation was different. They could still maintain their sharp and precise attacks, and they could still maintain their previous cooperation. It could be said that the blood giant's blood river technique, not only did it not help it escape its predicament, but it also made its situation worse. Torrents surged in the blood river. The waves were fierce. The cultivators of the 9 prefectures were successful in their attacks. One after another, their buttocks were chopped off. Even the blood giant's head was chopped off once. However, for a strange existence like the blood giant, having its head chopped off wasn't fatal. Blood surged around the wound, and a new head quickly grew out. However, after being chopped again and again, the blood giant's body kept shrinking. Coupled with Lu Ye's constant devouring power, the blood giant finally couldn't take it anymore. Half a day after the start of the battle, the indomitable giant had shrunk by more than half. At this stage, the cultivators of the 9 prefectures had undoubtedly found it easier to deal with the blood giant. If the cultivators of the 9 prefectures were 30% on the offensive and 70% on defense in the previous battle, then they were now evenly matched. The more time passed, the better the situation became for the cultivators of the 9 prefectures. On the contrary, the blood giant would become more and more unbearable. At this point, the cultivators of the 9 prefectures would undoubtedly win. It was only a matter of time. The closer they got to this point, the more they didn't dare to be careless. They had already experienced the most dangerous moment. If they were to fail miserably when they were about to win, that would be a tragedy. After more than 2 hours, the blood giant's arms and legs were chopped off countless times. Its body shrank again. As its body shrank, the blood giant attacked. At this point, the cultivators of the 9 prefectures were already 70% on the offensive and 30% on defense. Of course, the sword cultivators were an exception. When sword cultivators faced their enemies, they would only attack and not defend. This was because they had always believed in the principle that the strongest attack was the best defense. Therefore, sword cultivators' battles were often extremely dangerous. Perhaps they would always be at a disadvantage in some battles. However, they would always be the ones to survive in the end. This was because in their battles, it might not be easy to determine victory or defeat, but life and death could be determined in an instant. The cultivators of the 9 prefectures were still as sharp as ever. They didn't show mercy because of the blood giant's weakness. At this point, everyone had expended a lot of energy and no longer had the ability to fight a similar battle. Naturally, they had to eliminate the blood giant from its roots. Lu Yi had been maintaining the devouring power of the innate skill tree, which had unknowingly sped up the battle. Until a certain moment, the blood giant, whose body had shrunk to only a few dozen feet tall, suddenly trembled. Its entire body also began to twist and change. At this moment, the cultivators of the 9 prefectures around it all made the same decision. They all retreated. Everyone knew that the blood tribe would self-detonate. Since the blood giant was proficient in all kinds of blood techniques, it shouldn't be a problem. It didn't make sense that it wouldn't self-destruct. The self-preservation power of a holy seed was already extremely terrifying, let alone a blood giant like this. Even though its body had shrunk greatly, it was still a huge creature that was a few dozen feet tall. If it self-destructed, there was probably no place on the entire Jade Pillar Peak that was safe. Everyone was on guard against such a situation. Therefore, when they saw the blood giant's abnormality, they had a countermeasure. Lu Yi didn't feel that it was using the blood explosion technique. This was because their blood rivers had merged. Therefore, his perception of the situation was more vivid than the others. When a member of the blood clan used the blood explosion technique, there was a very clear sign that their own aura would become extremely dangerous. The blood giant didn't have any dangerous aura. This situation seemed, on the contrary, it seemed that it was somewhat unable to maintain its huge body. After all, its incubation was incomplete. When it had just turned into a blood fetus, it was forcefully destroyed by the cultivators of the 9 prefectures. Therefore, strictly speaking, it was a defective product. When it didn't consume too much energy, it could still maintain its huge body. However, at this moment, it had consumed too much energy and was showing signs of collapsing. This was indeed the case. The blood giant's body was distorting more and more seriously. It was so serious that it was unable to launch any attacks. Although it was trying its best to maintain itself, it was ultimately futile. As far as the eye could see, its body would occasionally collapse. It would occasionally expand. Following another fierce expansion, its huge body suddenly exploded. The bloody color of FAU's body swept in all directions and rushed into the huge blood river. Was it dead? Lu Yi was stunned. After he recalled his doppelganger and returned, he knew that the cultivators of the 9 prefectures had an extremely high chance of winning this battle. However, he never expected that such a powerful enemy would appear. Unexpectedly, it ended in such a way. However, he quickly sensed that something was wrong. This was because there was still an extremely strange aura in the place where the blood giant's huge body had disappeared. Almost at the same time that Lu Yi sensed this strange aura, it had already pounced toward his location at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, it was right in front of him. It was so fast that Lu Yi didn't even have time to change his position. Amidst the bloody scene, an even denser bloody light was especially conspicuous. This bloody light had the outline of a person, but it didn't have any clear facial features. However, it had an extremely evil aura. Just like that, it directly crashed into Lu Ye's body. Chapter 1185. In the blood river, Lu Ye's body shook as he clearly felt something invade his body. He hurriedly checked his talent tree. Under normal circumstances, anything that invaded his body and was harmful to him would be burned by the talent tree. But what surprised him was that the talent tree did not react at all. This was somewhat abnormal. But soon, Lu Yi found out where the blood shadow had gone, because at this moment, his spirit sea suddenly became turbulent. If it were not for the soul-suppressing pagoda, he was afraid he would have become dizzy and lost his mind. He hurriedly stabilized his body and his divine sense surged. In the next moment, his soul avatar condensed in his spirit sea. Looking up, sure enough, there was a blood-red figure in his spirit sea. Just as he had seen before, a figure with a human outline and an evil aura. It was not that the talent tree was incompetent, but that the talent tree was powerless against this kind of invasion. The innate skill tree existed in his source spiritual cavity, which was the location of his dantian. At first, the innate skill tree could burn away all the energy flowing through his source spiritual cavity, eliminating anything that was harmful to Lu Yi. But as Lu Yi developed the innate skill tree's abilities, the range of this burning increased. Now, in theory, as long as it was a place his body could touch, the innate skill tree could burn and devour it. But the range of the talent tree's burning range did not include the spirit sea. Because the spirit sea was the place where a cultivator's spirit was condensed, the talent tree could not easily burn it, so as to avoid any damage to the spirit. If the spirit was really damaged, the cultivator would become mentally retarded. Lu Yi had felt this as early as when he fought with Lu Yueme. That day, Lu Yueme used some kind of treasure to force her way into his spirit sea as a soul avatar and fought with him. At that time, the talent tree did not react at all. This blood shadow should be the core of the blood giant. The blood giant's body collapsed, but it still remained. It wantonly rushed into Lu Ye's spirit sea, inadvertently avoiding the talent tree's power. Its goal was very simple. It wanted to take over Lu Ye's body and seize it. Possession. Lu Ye had only seen this kind of thing in some ancient records. At that time, he only felt that the cultivation world was full of strange things, but he had never heard of any cultivator in the 9 provinces who had such a method. He had never thought that he would encounter such a situation one day. He could only sigh at his good luck. In the Sea of Blood, there were hundreds of cultivators from the 9 continents. Why did Blood Shadow choose him? If it was his good luck, then it was naturally Blood Shadow's bad luck. At this moment, a large expanse of blood-red light appeared behind Shui Ying, attempting to envelop Lu Ye's sea of consciousness. The blood-red light clearly possessed great corrosive power. Once Lu Ye's sea of consciousness was completely invaded by the blood-red light, the entire sea of consciousness would belong to Shui Ying. His soul would either be destroyed or become Shui Ying's vassal. Neither of these was a situation that Lu Ye could accept. Fortunately, Lu Ye's soul was strong enough, and there was the soul-suppressing pagoda in his divine sea. As the blood-red light spread, the soul-suppressing pagoda also bloomed with a pure white light, resisting the blood-red light's corrosion. Having the experience of fighting over souls with Lu Ye was now familiar with the process. He raised his hand and grabbed at the void, and a long saber appeared in his hand. It looked exactly the same as the Panshan saber, but it was the soul-severing saber. Last time, he'd used this saber to cut Lu Yueme into pieces. As his figure moved, the seawater in the deity ocean also rose and fell, turning into fierce waves that followed closely behind him and spread to both sides. Seeing Lu Ye's fierce attacks, Blood Shadow still wanted to dodge, but a waterspout rushed out from below the divine sea, binding it like a rope. This was Lu Ye's divine sea, his home ground. The water of the divine sea was the manifestation of his soul's power. Any enemy who fought in this place would have to suffer the disadvantage of being in a geographical location. Lu Yueme had suffered greatly before, and now it was Blood Shadow's turn. It could only be said that Blood Shadow had chosen Lu Ye out of so many other targets. It was truly a tragedy. Blood Shadow barely managed to break free of the waterspout before it could dodge, and Lu Ye's saber slashed into its body. A gash immediately appeared on Blood Shadow's body, but no blood flowed out. Lu Ye didn't know what Blood Shadow's true nature was, but since it could so easily invade his divine sea, it should have something to do with his soul's power. However, since it was the Blood Giant's core, it was very likely that it was an existence that existed in between reality and illusion. Even without a mouth or nose, Lu Ye heard a shrill scream the moment the soul-severing saber struck Blood Shadow. That scream was formed by the fluctuations of soul's power. An existence like Blood Shadow was simply the bane of the soul-severing saber. Being struck head-on like this, Blood Shadow naturally didn't have a good ending. Lu Ye didn't show any mercy. The Panshan saber in his hand danced endlessly, transforming into a ball of saber light that enveloped Blood Shadow. Blood Shadow screamed incessantly as wounds appeared on Blood Shadow's body. Although those wounds were slowly healing, they weren't as fast as Lu Ye's attacks. In just a few short moments, Blood Shadow's body was covered in countless wounds, and its entire body was in tatters. Blood Shadow was clearly panicking. Originally, it had been fighting with all its might. If it succeeded, not only would it be able to escape death, but it would also immediately obtain a new life. Blood Shadow didn't have much intelligence, and it had chosen Lu Ye mostly out of instinct. This was because Lu Ye's cultivation was the lowest among everyone present, so it would be the easiest to kill. It was also because Lu Ye was the only one with a powerful divine nature. This was extremely attractive to Blood Shadow. Thus, it hadn't chosen Lu Ye unintentionally, but instinctively. In the end, not only had it failed, but it had also fallen into an even more dangerous situation. In the previous battle, Lu Ye hadn't done much, mainly because he was the only one who could suppress the Blood Giant. He had to ensure his own safety first. Being in such an intense battle, his fighting spirit had long since surged. He never thought that he would have the opportunity to personally participate. In just a few short moments, Blood Shadow had been defeated like the wind. It instinctively wanted to escape from this dangerous world because it had already sensed that if it didn't leave now, it really would die here. However, while it had come easily, it wasn't so easy to leave. After all, this was Lu Ye's home ground. Before he attacked, Lu Ye had already considered the possibility that his opponent would escape, so he immediately activated the power of the deity ocean, using the water of the deity ocean to surround the battlefield. If Blood Shadow wanted to leave, it would first have to break through the blockade of the deity ocean's water. Perhaps it had the ability to do so without any interference, but at this moment, Lu Ye was relentlessly pursuing it, so it had no time to break through the blockade of the seawater. The sharp, ear-piercing screeches hadn't stopped since the beginning. This battle was much simpler and easier than the Battle of Souls with Lu Yuemin. It was also far less intense than the battle against the Blood Giant just now. This was a simple battle where Lu Ye crushed his opponent in all aspects. Blood Shadow tried to escape, but there was nowhere to run. The soul-severing blade in Lu Ye's hand never left its side, constantly causing it harm. Blood Shadow's aura became weaker and weaker, and its figure became thinner and thinner. Until a certain moment, Lu Ye's long blade swept out, and a dazzling light suddenly shot out from the deity ocean, as if a great sun had risen above the sea. The great sun suddenly exploded, and in an even more dazzling light, a lotus flower formed by the blade light slowly bloomed. The third form of the tyrant blade, Lotus Sun. One Lu Ye's figure stood in the center of the lotus flower, and there was no trace of Blood Shadow in front of him. Only a speck of fluorescent light floated above the soul-severing blade. The light gradually disappeared, the raging waves subsided, and the turbulent deity ocean calmed down. Lu Ye looked at the speck of light with rapt attention and raised his eyebrows slightly. Blood Shadow had been killed, but it had left behind this speck of light. He couldn't figure out what this speck of light was. He raised the soul-severing blade and tried to slash it a few times, but he couldn't cut it. However, after carefully sensing it, he could tell that this thing didn't seem to be harmful to him. Lu Ye raised his hand and grabbed at the speck of light. With a grab, the speck of light melted into his palm like snowflakes, and in the next moment, a lot of information inexplicably appeared in his mind. Lu Ye calmed his mind and carefully examined it. He soon figured out the true identity of the speck of light. It was a trace of Blood Shadow's spirit. The Blood Shadow had been defeated, but this trace of spirit had survived, but it wouldn't last for long. Even if Lu Ye didn't care about it, it would soon die. However, Lu Ye's actions allowed him to obtain a lot of information from the remnant spirit. Little Nine was right. The will of heaven and earth in this world was not a pure will of heaven and earth. That was why it possessed a sliver of intelligence. When it sensed that it could not compete with Little Nine, it withdrew from the battlefield where it was fighting Little Nine and turned to open up a new battlefield. That Blood Shadow could be regarded as the world will of this world. Under normal circumstances, this was impossible. The will of heaven and earth was the aggregation of the complex information of the entire world. It was vast, ethereal, and untouchable. It was impossible for it to be manifested in a form that could be observed, let alone a bloody shadow like that. However, the special characteristics of blood-refining realm had caused this situation to occur. The information Lu Ye obtained was very messy. After all, the Blood Shadow had been killed, so the remaining information in the last trace of spirit was naturally incomplete. But from this messy information he still learned a lot of unknown truths. The most important point was that a bold guess he had before was actually true. Blood-refining realm was really the remains of a powerful female life form after her death. It was impossible to find out how such a powerful creature died. This was destined to be an extremely ancient secret. They only knew that her ruined body drifted about in the void for countless years, turning into a realm and then giving birth to living creatures. The underground blood river that covered blood-refining realm was the blood vessels of this dead powerhouse, and the blood that flowed through it was her blood. This was also the fundamental reason why the blood race had bloodline inheritances. When the blood fetus was hatched in the blood river, it imperceptibly received the many mysteries contained in the blood, so it was born with knowledge. 6. Chapter 1186. Perhaps it was unwillingness to die, or perhaps it was its own remnant thoughts, But after countless years of accumulation and various coincidences, a very special existence was born in the blood refinement realm. It was the blood shadow, which could also be called the blood spirit. It was born from the heavens and earth, and was also formed from a drop of blood from the heart of the powerful female creature after her death. To some extent, its existence itself was the continuation of the will of the female creature. The foundation of the blood refinement realm was the remnant body of the female creature. The blood spirit born in such an environment could naturally be regarded as the will of heaven and earth of the entire world. It was ignorant and unintelligent, but it had a trace of its own spirit. So when the cultivators of the 9 regions invaded this realm, it instinctively reacted, and that was to send down heavenly punishment. Unfortunately, it was obstructed by Little 9. In the confrontation of the will of heaven and earth, it fell into a disadvantage. Driven by instinct, it left the battlefield with Little 9 and sent down instructions to all the remaining holy seeds in this realm, telling them to gather on the Jade Pillar Peak. This location was the heart of the female creature, and also the place where the blood trail was born. It had an extremely special meaning to the blood spirit, and only in this place could it display its full strength. What happened next was simple. Under its call, the holy seeds that came here were fused together by it without any resistance. With its own existence as the core, it turned into a giant with solid blood, competing with the many powerhouses of the 9 regions. If Lu Yi did not exist, or if Lu Ye's divine nature could not suppress it, the experts of the 9 regions would have most likely failed in this battle. At that time, such a blood giant would sweep in all directions, and it would be a great trouble. But the affairs of the world were unpredictable. Its divine nature was suppressed by Lu Yi, giving the experts of the 9 regions a chance to eliminate it. A shocking battle broke out, and the blood giant that could sweep across the entire blood refinement realm collapsed. At the last moment, the blood spirit found Lu Yi, wanting to seize his body. How could it have a good ending? Many things became clear. Little 9 had said before that the will of heaven and earth of the blood refinement realm was not like a simple will of heaven and earth, and it was not a special existence like the blood spirit. It was just that Little 9 did not understand what the will of heaven and earth of the blood refinement realm was. Now, it knew that it was indeed special, so special that even if time was reversed, under the same environment, the same blood spirit might not be born again. There were also many things that Lu Yi did not understand. For example, why was its summoning able to make the holy seeds fuse with it? Why was its holiness able to surpass the limits of the holy seeds? But at this moment, there was no point in probing into this. The winner was king while the loser was in the wrong. Just like how the vampire holy seeds couldn't understand how a human like Lu Yi could possess such a powerful holiness that all the other holy seeds felt despair. Familiar voices echoed in his ears, especially the sect leaders, which was the most urgent. After the blood giant collapsed, Lu Yi suddenly froze in place. The sea of blood spread out, and no one knew what had happened. They only vaguely sensed that Lu Yi had encountered some kind of trouble. Otherwise, there was no way he wouldn't have reacted to their shouts. Amidst this kind of anxiety, the sea of blood that filled the skies suddenly shrank. In the next moment, the darkness that had covered the top of Jade Pillar Peak for a long time dissipated. It was already nighttime. There was no cloud in the dark moon, and the sky was filled with stars. The sect leader immediately looked in Lu Ye's direction. Seeing that he was safe and sound, he was still worried and asked, "Is there anything wrong?" Lu Yi shook his head. His soul battle with Sanguis did not last long. Moreover, no one present had noticed that Sanguis wanted to possess him. Therefore, there was no need to mention it. Longbow's loud voice rang out, "Ya brat, is that big guy dead?" In the end, when the blood giant collapsed, everyone hurriedly distanced themselves from it. Moreover, the blood sea was concealing it, so no one could clearly see what had happened. They only knew that after that, the blood giant's aura disappeared. While Lu Yi and Sanguis were fighting, they had also searched the blood sea but to no avail. Among the people present, the only one who could determine what would happen to the blood giant was Lu Yi, who had been maintaining the blood sea all this time. "He's dead. Congratulations, seniors. The last trouble of the blood refining realm has been solved. We, the 9 regions, have won. Long xiang ba si ba si ba. Yang Pi is so weird, but it's still a good thing. This old man is exhausted. In the eyes of the experts of the 9 regions, the blood giant had dissipated. It was indeed somewhat inexplicable. Even if it was suppressed and destined to be defeated when Rui Fan defended against Yi Bo, it still had the ability to continue fighting, so there was no reason for it to suddenly collapse. However, if one were to consider its next move, its collapse would seem to be a matter of course. After receiving Lu Ye's confirmation, the hundreds of people one by one landed on the Jade Pillar Peak. This battle exhausted the hundreds of cultivators of the 9 regions. Many of them repeatedly wandered on the edge of life and death. It could be said that except for a few people, everyone else was injured. Especially the body and weapon cultivators at the front, their injuries were not light. Now that the battle was over, it was naturally time to heal. However, Long Bo was not idle. His loud voice still shook the sky. I say, everyone, after this battle, we can be considered to have pacified the blood-refining realm. Shouldn't we celebrate? Pang Zhen glanced at him weakly. Your arm is broken. Don't you feel uncomfortable? First, we'll talk about the celebration when we return to the 9 regions. Both of them were body cultivators and soldiers of their respective camps. They had been working together since the insect disaster. Even if they had any grudges before, after experiencing so much together, they more or less sympathized with each other. Long Bo smiled. My arm is only broken. It's not new. However, you're right. We'll talk about the celebration when we return to the 9 regions. The celebration banquet after the main calamity was not organized properly. It was mainly because Lu Yi had thrown out the blood-refining realm. This shocking news caused everyone to be in no mood to hold a celebration banquet. Now that the blood-refining realm was a big problem, everyone had hope of reaching the upper realm in the future. This matter should indeed be handled properly. As they spoke, they found a place to sit cross-legged and took a spirit pill to heal their injuries. Everyone was healing their injuries. Only Lu Yi did not need to because he did not suffer any injuries in this battle and did not consume much energy. After the blood giant died, there was no sacred blood left behind. This was a strange thing. This was not the same as when Lu Yi killed the sacred seed. Lu Yi suspected that all the sacred blood was completely consumed by the blood spirit to maintain the blood giant's huge body. To him, this was not something worth paying attention to. Aside from increasing his holiness, the sacred blood could also increase his strength by absorbing the massive amount of energy contained within the sacred blood during the refining process. Now that the blood refining realm was settled, Lu Yi did not need to increase his holiness. As for the huge amount of energy contained in the sacred blood, if he really wanted to cultivate, the safest and fastest way was to rely on the golden spirit stick, not refining the sacred blood. He sat quietly on the side, protecting these seniors even though they did not need it. At the same time, he was quietly communicating with Little Nine, telling it about the existence of the blood spirit and the foundation of the world's will. Little Nine suddenly realized. No wonder I felt it was a little strange. It turns out that there was such a way. But fortunately, it was solved in the end. The essence of the blood-refining realm, did you know before? Logically speaking, the blood-refining realm was formed by the remains of a female creature. Little Nine most likely knew, but it had never told him about this. Little Nine quickly denied. I didn't know, how could I know? My understanding of the blood-refining realm is not much more than yours. In the 9 provinces, I know everything because I am the 9 provinces' heaven's secret, but I don't know about other realms. The problem of the blood refinement realm was basically solved. Even if the remaining vampires were still in hiding, they wouldn't be able to do anything. It wouldn't be long before they were all wiped out. However, there was something else that Lu Yi was concerned about. What is the Dragon Soaring Realm's secret realm? Blood race once appeared there, and there is also a blood realm. Secret realms like the Dragon Soaring Realm and the Myriad Beast Realm. They are all fragments of worlds that I captured. Although those worlds were destroyed, the things that happened in those worlds and the people that existed there left some traces. The Dragon Trace is the Dragon Soaring Realm. When I captured it, Its will of the world had not completely disappeared, so I was able to use it. Using methods, I was able to reshape the various events of a certain critical period in that realm. Take the peerless continent that you went to as an example. If the cultivators of the 9 provinces did not go to save them, the human race of the peerless continent would have most likely been exterminated. Only the corpse race could survive there. Once I captured it, it would also become a secret realm of the world, allowing cultivators of the Cloud River tier to enter to gain experience. So there really is a blood realm in this world, and the foundation of that blood realm is most likely another part of the body. In ancient times, a powerful female creature was beheaded in the void, and part of her torso turned into the blood-refining realm. Then what about the head and other parts of her body? The blood realm was most likely evolved from the other part of the female creature's body, so it could give birth to the blood race like the blood-refining realm. Lu Ye's scalp was a little numb. Little 9, I have a bad feeling. What do you mean? The bloodline inheritance of the blood race mentions something. When the blood arts are cultivated to the highest level, they can be reborn from a drop of blood. I thought it was nonsense, but now it seems that it may not be false. Do you think this dead female life form is still alive? At the very least, the part of her head is still alive. Now, could it be that she is searching for her own body in the void? And could there be some undetectable connection between her body and her head? Little 9's voice was calm. Are you scaring me or scaring yourself? It's purely a discussion. This kind of thing may not be impossible. If such a situation really happens, then our 9 provinces will be completely exposed. So you need to be strong. Even if such a situation really happens, as long as your human race is strong enough, you can naturally deal with all kinds of dangers from the void. Lu Yi thought for a moment and had to admit that what little 9 said was very reasonable. 3. Chapter 1187. This time, Lu Yi and little 9 talked a lot, including the future development of the situation and the various changes that might occur in the blood refinement realm in the future. It also allowed Lu Yi to gradually understand how the foundation of the 9 provinces would be improved, and how the top elites of the 9 provinces could reach the upper realm. The reason why the cultivators of the 9 regions went on an expedition to the blood refining world was not only to protect themselves, but also to seek their own future. Saving the suffering humans of this world was actually just a side benefit. Of course, this did not mean that this matter was not important. This matter was also very important. Otherwise, during the expedition, the major sects of the 9 regions would not specially send cultivators to guard the villages where humans gathered to protect their safety. Little 9 had mentioned some of these key points to Lu Yi before, but it was only a general description. It was only today that he saw the whole picture. It had to be said that the 9 provinces had little 9, which was the fortune of the humans of the 9 provinces. Under its planning and arrangement, the situation of the 9 provinces would definitely get better and better, and the benefits would depend on the efforts of the humans of the 9 provinces. There was a limit to what little 9 could do, but the future of the human cultivators was unlimited. There would be a day when the humans of the 9 provinces would definitely reach the height that their ancestors had reached, or even surpass it. After a few days, everyone had more or less recovered. For the time being, those who had not fully recovered needed time to settle down, so they all dispersed. Just as Lu Yi was about to leave, Lan Qiue came. A few days ago, she was inspired by the blood spirit. At that time, her thoughts were in a mess, and she could not control herself. However, after the blood spirit died, she returned to normal. However, she still maintained the direction she was going, mainly to see what was attracting her here. When she arrived and saw Lu Yi, she understood the whole story after a detailed discussion. She was secretly shocked and broke out in a cold sweat. She was only glad that she was far enough away from the Jade Pillar Peak at that time. Otherwise, she was afraid that the blood spirit would have merged into the blood giant's body, and at that time, she would have died without a doubt. The expedition of the 9 provinces to the blood refinement realm entered the final stage. Almost 80% of the 9 provinces' cultivators above the Cloud River tier were now scattered all over the blood refinement realm, searching everywhere for the traces of the fish that had escaped the net. Once the remnants of the blood race were discovered, they would immediately be inhumanely besieged. More than 10 days later, nearly 3 months after the start of this war, the Holy Master of the Jade Blood Holy Land, Feng Wujiang, led many top elites of the human race jointly issued a notice. This war had won a complete victory. The blood race in the blood refining world had been exterminated. When the news spread out, the whole world rejoiced. In this war, the cultivators of the 9 regions benefited a lot, but the ones who benefited the most were the humans of the blood refinement realm. From now on, they would no longer live like pigs or dogs, no longer be enslaved by another race, no longer have to live in fear, and no longer have to live day after day. After several months of contact, the human race in this world also knew about the existence of 9 regions. They had a natural closeness to the 9 regions cultivators who saved them from the fire and water, especially those 9 regions cultivators who were responsible for guarding the various human race villages. Recently, they had gained a lot of support. The war was over, and the next thing to do was naturally to divide the benefits. This was the proper process, and also what the cultivators of 9 regions deserved. Even if it was not as an invader, but as a savior, for 9 regions, the blood refining realm was still a piece of fat meat. Its territory was vast, only slightly inferior to that of 9 regions. The foundation of the whole world was almost the same as that of 9 regions. Who wouldn't want to take a bite of such a big piece of fat meat? The most important point was that the number of humans here was quite large. Even if they were oppressed by the blood race all year round and lived a precarious life, the population of the blood refinement realm was only a little more than that of 9 regions. This was because although the blood race treated the humans here as blood food, they would not do such a thing as draining the pond to catch all the fish. This happened when they first came to the blood refinement realm. The humans who lived in the first village had some mental pressure. Apart from that, there was no problem in life. In addition, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the blood refinement realm was far stronger than that of the 9 regions. In addition to worrying about the predation of the blood race, the humans here actually lived a carefree life. All these factors created the huge population base of the blood refinement realm. What was the foundation of the cultivation world? It was those numerous mortals who had no cultivation aptitude. This was the common understanding of all the cultivators in the 9 regions. As long as the foundation of mortals was large enough, the world of cultivation would be filled with them. Only then could the cultivation world flourish, and generations of cultivators emerge one after another. The general trend was like this, so in the 9 regions, every sect had its own territory. The sects could only recruit disciples from their own territory, and it was not easy to cross the boundary. In the beginning, in order to expand the scale of the bottom-level disciples of the Blue Blood sect as soon as possible, the sect master even went to other sects' recruitment ceremonies to snatch disciples. As a result, he was chased to Ao Mountain by the sect master and had a fight with the sect master. This matter was the sect master's fault, and he deserved to be chased and beaten. After the blood refinement realm was taken down, the major sects of 9 regions naturally began to divide up the territory. In fact, it was not too complicated, because in the process of conquering the blood refinement realm, all the sects, large and small, had already realized this matter. Almost tacitly, each of them circled the territory of their own sect in the blood refinement realm. Their approach was very simple, that was, they scattered their disciples in the circled area, just like how beasts would use their urine to circle their territory, but the cultivators of 9 regions did it more elegantly. Before the war ended, it was not easy to announce this matter. Now that the war was over, there was no need to hesitate. They all had a tacit understanding. The lower-ranked sects had a smaller area, while the higher-ranked sects had a larger area. The Blue Blood sect also circled a large territory. Thanks to Lu Ye's foresight and Little Nine's secret help, with the Tianji pillar of the wrestling grotto heaven as the center, the area within a radius of 100,000 miles could be considered the Blue Blood sect's territory. This was because this area was originally Lan Qiue's work. It was a territory controlled by the blood race's holy sage. Although Lan Qiue had not gone through the process of joining the Blue Blood sect, the news had already spread. The territory under her belonged to the Blue Blood sect, and this was a matter of course. Moreover, the blood race in this area were all cleaned up by the blue blood sect. This was a huge territory, larger than any of the sects in 9 regions. Compared to the blue blood sect's territory in 9 regions, it was 2 to 3 times larger. The Ziwei Taoist palace benefited from the blue blood sect and circled a piece of land in the nearby area. The purpose of enclosing the territory was not for the territory, but for the human race living in this area. With a large enough population base, it would inevitably contribute various talents to the various sects in 9 regions in the future. On one point, although the cultivation world of 9 regions had discussed, they had reached a consensus. That was, it was not appropriate for all the humans in the blood refining world to migrate. Because there were too many people, if they really migrated to 9 regions, it would suppress the living space of the humans in 9 regions. Therefore, it was best for the humans in the blood refining world to stay in the blood refining world. At that time, each sect would send their remaining people to build a branch sect in their own territory in the blood refining world. The purpose was to select all kinds of good seedlings suitable for cultivation. Once they found them, they would send them to 9 regions to cultivate. Of course, this was the follow-up plan. The entire blood refining world was almost completely divided up by the various sects in 9 regions in a very short period of time. Except for one place, it was the Blue Blood Holy Land. Although the Blue Blood Holy Land was not big, the number of humans living in it was not small. After decades of development, the number and quality of cultivators it had was almost not inferior to any of the top sects in 9 regions. What they lacked was only 9th-order Divine Sea Realm cultivators. Because even after decades of development, a large number of Divine Sea Realm cultivators had emerged in the Blue Blood Holy Land, but there was not enough time for them to reach the 9th order. If such a force was pulled back to 9 regions and added to a certain sect, then no matter what grade that sect originally was, it would become a colossus. However, the Blue Blood Holy Land could not be coveted by others. If it really wanted to be integrated into a sect in 9 regions, it would be none other than the Blue Blood sect. After all, it was brought up by Feng Wujiang. Before the cultivators of 9 regions invaded the blood refining world, the Blue Blood Holy Land was the only pure land for the human race in this world. It was also the front line against the blood race. Since the Blue Blood sect was almost removed from the list by Heaven's Secret, although it had gone through several ranks, it still had not returned to the First Order. At present, according to Heaven's Secret's evaluation, the Blue Blood sect was only a 3rd Order sect, and this was because the sect had 3 Divine Sea Realm cultivators. If there were no Divine Sea Realm cultivators, it would not even be rated as a 3rd Order sect. If it could be supplemented by the power of the Blue Blood Holy Land, it would be just around the corner for it to return to the First Order sect. Your eldest senior brother's meaning is that if our sect is willing to accept the cultivators of the Holy Land, he will order all the cultivators of the Holy Land to join our sect. I believe that those people will also listen to the order. When the time comes, they will help our sect to return to the First Order sect's glory. In the wrestling cave, the 3 Divine Sea Realm cultivators of the Blue Blood sect gathered. The sect master said this and asked Shui Yuan and Lu Yi for their opinions. What do you think? Shui Yuan had no opinion. You can make the decision. All right. Lu Yi looked at the sect master. What does the sect master think? The sect master laughed. This old man came to ask you, why did you ask again? Yes. Lu Yi smiled. Since the sect master came to ask, it means that you do not agree with this approach. This disciple also has the same idea. It is best not to integrate the power of the Blue Blood Holy Land into our sect. Yes. What do you mean? The sect master raised his eyebrows. Lu Yi said, first of all, it is the problem of a sense of belonging. The 9 regions sects usually recruit disciples when they are young or when their cultivation is not high. This is to facilitate the cultivation of the disciples' sense of belonging to the sect. The power of the Blue Blood Holy Land is indeed not to be underestimated, but many of them have already achieved success in their cultivation, and many of them are in the Divine Sea Realm. If such a force joins our sect, it will indeed raise our sect's grade in a short period of time, but in the long run, it may not be a good thing. They respect eldest senior brother, not the Blue Blood sect, so they will not have a great sense of belonging to our sect. Even if they have good morals, if they really join our sect, it will have a huge impact on the existing structure of our sect, and it will be detrimental to the growth of the disciples below. Please enter .com to view the latest update in your browser. Chapter 1188. Hearing this, the sect leader nodded. He had also considered this matter, and Bai Ran knew that Lu Yi was right. This was also Ju's concern. There's another point. The Jade Blood Holy Land was named after the Jade Blood Holy Land. It was also led by Master Jing, but in fact, it was not only eldest senior brother who contributed, but also those old seniors with top-notch strength. Therefore, the power of the Holy Land of Jade Blood should not be read. It will become the private property of this sect. It belonged to the entire 9 prefectures. Right now, the 2 factions had put aside their former enmity and were sincerely cooperating. I really shouldn't do anything that would attract the disdain of others. If I really do stir up the power of the Jade Blood Holy Land, then I'll have to deal with them. Maybe we're on the bright side. They wouldn't say anything. But what was he thinking? No one knew. The first skill was 2 carries. His expression was one of relief. The disciple that Evil Moon Valley had inadvertently recruited had grown up. He was also very thorough in his considerations. Recently, whenever he asked, he often recalled the scene of that day. He was only glad that Lu Yi had chosen the green leek landscape. Otherwise, if they really missed out on such an outstanding disciple, they really didn't know which sect would benefit. Third, the benefits that our clan has obtained from this expedition are already large enough. Not to mention other things, the size of the territory that I have demarcated does not match our clan's current grade. They even surpassed all the first-rank clans. Just this alone. No one else will. They said that it was because the disciples had worked hard and made great contributions in this expedition, so this was what our Jade Master sect deserved. He said it with a calm expression because it was the truth. But if we accept the power of the Jade Blood Holy Land, it'll be the same as accepting the mortals of the Jade Blood Holy Land. The Jade Blood Holy Land isn't large, but it's densely populated. The base number was huge. It was equivalent to encircling another piece of land. His table manners were a bit unsightly. The sect master was pleased. It's rare for you to consider everything so thoroughly. In fact, your eldest senior brother also said that he didn't recommend this old man to gather the strength of the Jade Blood Holy Land. The concerns he raised are basically the same as what you think. Lu Ye laughed and said, coming from the same school, naturally we have the same idea. And so, the matter was settled. The Blue Blood sect was the Blue Blood sect. The Blue Blood Holy Land was the Blue Blood Holy Land. The 2 would not merge into one, so there was no need for him to deliberately spread the news. After the dust of the blood refining realm settled, the Blue Blood Holy Land would be able to enter the Blue Blood Holy Land. The Jade Blood Holy Land would choose a piece of land in the 9 prefectures and establish a foothold there. At that time, all the cultivators in the Holy Land would be transferred to the new Suo sect in the 9 regions. The refinement realm was not a place where cultivators could continue to redeem themselves. Perhaps it wouldn't be a problem for a while. However, as time passed, the foundation of this world would fade away, and the number of worlds would decrease. At that time, the cultivators would have to continue living in this world. Then it's going to get better. It was difficult to walk. The boundless upper realm. This was a situation that no cultivator could tolerate. The scattered cultivators of the 9 regions began to gather again, and the place where they gathered was the place where they first came from, which was next to the pillar of Tianji. Where the Tianji pillar was located, there were also many cultivators who were busy. On the other side of the wrestling net, with Lu Yi in the lead, a large group of people were busy setting up the array. The array formation he set up was very simple. It was a large array formation. The mechanism of this formation was very simple. It was used to gather spiritual energy. It was an auxiliary formation. Most of the time, they were used as internal facets of other formations to support the operation of other formations. The positions of the other pillars of heavenly secrets were basically the same. The purpose of the formation was to gather spiritual energy. In order to prepare for the impending suspension of navigation from the alchemy realm. This was different from the 9 prefectures. The blood-refining realm had always been in a moving state. This was also what the cultivators of the 9 regions had seen back then. It was because the starlight of the blood-refining realm was getting brighter and brighter. Because the blood-refining realm had always been close to the 9 regions, the closer it was, the easier it was for Byran to see it. If the entire blood-refining realm was compared to a large ship sailing in the starry sky, then the route of this large ship was coincidentally facing the location of the 9 regions world. If they left it alone, this huge realm would directly collide with the 9 regions. At that time, it would definitely be a disaster that would destroy the realm. The Blood Clan had already died. The only Blood Clan that was still alive was Lan Chiua. After 3 months of campaigning, they finally won. The cultivators of the 9 regions did not want to see the tragic scene of their hometown being destroyed. Fortunately for this scene, Little Nine had a plan. However, he needed the cultivators of the 9 regions to put in a little effort. This matter was spread out through Lu Ye's mouth. Because the formation was simple, it was not difficult for Lu Yi to set it up. The difficult part was that the scope of good was wide, and the country was next to every pillar of heavenly secrets. At that time, there would be a large number of doctors to tear apart. They were so busy for more than 10 days. Next to more than 100 pillars of heavenly secrets, a large formation was set up. Within the range of the formation, each cultivator regardless of their cultivation realm. They all sat cross-legged and concentrated. The cultivators gathered at the wrestling grotto heaven were not only by Yuqin and Su Tang Chaoyan. Because the number of cultivators from the 2 sects was too small, there were cultivators from other sects who came. Lu Yi sat in front of the heavenly secrets pillar. Little Nine could not be shown in front of others, so he was responsible for everything. What he had to do was to wait for Little Nine to give a signal at the right time. Wait for the signal. The battlefield imprint suddenly moved. Lu Yi checked and Little Nine's signal came. He immediately shouted, "Begin! Begin!" At the same time, he injected spiritual energy into the harmonized spirit great path below him. All the cultivators urged their spiritual energy. They injected it into the large formation below them. At the same time, the sky above the heavenly secrets pillar was filled with wind and clouds. The enormous spiritual energy of heaven and earth was drawn by an invisible force. It gathered towards the heavenly secrets pillar. The entire heavenly secrets pillar seemed to have become a black hole that swallowed everything. No matter how much spiritual energy was injected into it, it would be completely absorbed. Beside Lu Yi, and Lu Po were also working hard. They contributed their own strength. The pillar of heavenly secrets trembled incessantly as numerous complicated patterns appeared on its surface. It was as if something was about to break out of the pillar. This situation lasted for a long time. Something was indeed breaking out of the pillar. It was a pillar of light that shot into the sky. It pierced into the clouds. It continued. The pillar of light was so bright that even from 1,000,000 miles away, it could be seen clearly. After the heavenly secrets pillar lake emitted light, Lianjie's Qian was there. A pillar of light entered and exited the heavenly secrets pillar during the day. In an instant, heaven and earth shook. If one looked down from the starry sky. At this moment, Lianjie imitated hundreds of huge swords. The power of all the cultivators flowed out like water, forcing everyone to swallow yang spirit pills or spirit stones in their hands to recover as much as possible. Above the hundreds of light swords inserted in various parts of the main refinement world, dense ribbons of member power floated down. As time passed, the more the world shook, the brighter and brighter it became. All the living beings in the main refinement world. She couldn't help but have a feeling that everything was in Ho Chi's carriage. The carriage was slowing down rapidly. 9 provinces. In the past few months, people had been in a state of panic. This was because even mortals who had never cultivated had discovered some abnormalities in the starry sky. At first, the situation was not obvious. They only knew that a star in the night sky was getting brighter and brighter. However, as time passed, the true west eye of the star gradually revealed itself. To this day, even if it was broad daylight, as long as one looked up, They could see a large outline in the void from different directions. Moreover, this wheel was becoming clearer and larger. Some news inevitably spread. The mortals all knew that it was an existence similar to the 9 provinces. It was another realm from the starry sky. Now, this realm was approaching the 9 provinces. It probably wouldn't take long. It was about to collide head-on. Even the most ignorant mortals knew that this would cause some extinction disasters. Naturally, they would be terrified and uneasy. Even if the cultivators who stayed in the 9 provinces came out to comfort them, the situation wasn't any better. It could only be said that they didn't lose control. But how long could this situation last? No one could guarantee it. If it really reached the point where the people's hearts collapsed because of the pressure of despair, even if there was no collision between realms, it would probably be a disaster for the people of the 9 provinces. In fact, the cultivators of Thunderguard were also uncertain. Because they couldn't get in touch with the Nightmare Realm, they didn't know the progress of the teleportation. They were even more unclear. How could they make such a realm the size of a deer deviate from the orbit of the 9 provinces? They were all waiting anxiously. They tried their best to do their duty as cultivators and comfort the mortals who easily panicked. At every moment, all over the 9 provinces, there were people looking up. But every time they looked, it only brought deeper despair. Because compared to the last time they looked, the huge outline seemed to be bigger and clearer. This meant that the other party was closer to the 9 provinces. Even those cultivators of the spirit projection realm were affected. As a result, the situation of the entire battlefield became chaotic. Until this moment, waves of exclamations came from all over the 9 provinces. Because a pillar visible to the naked eye suddenly appeared on the huge outline, followed by a second, a third. Hundreds of pillars. No one knew what was going on. These pillars of light appeared so suddenly. Before, there was no complete light at all. But soon, the cultivators with profound cultivation bases noticed the camp that made them excited. The mortals and those cultivators with insufficient cultivation bases might not have noticed it yet. However, they could clearly tell that when the hundreds of light pillars appeared, they would not be able to escape. The speed of the blood-refining realm approaching the 9 provinces was rapidly slowing down. It seemed that there was an invisible force. It suppressed the advance of the blood-refining realm. Time passed. The speed of the blood-refining realm approaching the 9 provinces slowed down until it completely stopped. It would no longer approach the 9 provinces. The cultivators of the Divine Sea realm who saw this were all excited. Although they didn't know what had happened in the blood-refining realm, judging from the results, the expedition of the 9 provinces cultivators must have achieved unprecedented success. The current blood-refining realm had probably fallen into the control of the 9 provinces cultivators. Otherwise, such a situation would not have happened. The Tua immediately spread the news to the outside world. The news quickly reached the ears of the mortals. At this point, the atmosphere that had been uneasy for several months was swept away. For a time, the entire territory of the 9 divisions, the academic world celebrated. Everyone seemed to be in control of their lives. Please enter .com to view the latest update in your browser. Chapter 1189. The blood-refining realm, which had been drifting in the starry sky for tens of thousands of years, stopped. If one looked at it from the starry sky, it stopped not far from the 9 regions. However, this was only a relative distance. In fact, the distance between the 2 regions was still a boundary that the cultivators of the 9 regions could not break through. This was because the cultivators of the 9 regions did not have the ability to cross the starry sky. If they wanted to return to the 9 regions, they had to rely on the transmission of the Tianji pillar. The matter of the blood-refining realm was basically settled. The cultivators of the 9 regions who participated in the expedition also embarked on their return journey. In this expedition, although there were many casualties among the various sects, the cultivators who were still alive all made a lot of money. The amount of military merits they gained was beyond imagination. As long as the cultivators of the 9 regions had military merits, the first thing they would think of was to exchange for spirit sticks to cultivate. If they wanted to do so, they had to return to the 9 regions. Although the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the blood-refining realm was rich enough, in terms of cultivation speed, it was still more convenient to use spirit sticks. Moreover, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in this realm would not always be this rich because with the passing of the foundation of this realm, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth would become thinner and thinner. In the end, the blood-refining realm would most likely become a realm with a little bit of spiritual energy of heaven and earth. At that time, the survival of mortals in this realm would not be affected too much. However, if the cultivators stayed here for a long time, the progress of their cultivation would become very slow. At that time, with the foundation of the blood-refining realm, it might not even be able to produce a cultivator of the Cloud River realm. The blood-refining realm would exist as a vassal realm of the four regions. Its smallest use was to provide the small great Tao palaces of the four regions with suitable talents for cultivation. 1. The information was naturally spread by the sections. If there was a need to deliberately spread it, they only needed to casually talk about it when chatting with others. Naturally, it would spread very slowly. After all, it was also a secret. There were only a few people who left one after another. At the front, there were only Shang Zong, Lan Qiue, Shui Yuan, the sect leader, and the 7 cultivators of the Spirit Ocean realm left. 1_Jiao1 then looked at Jiao Wanchang. Junior Sister Pang, when you return to the 4 prefectures, remember to ask Tianji to bestow you with the Tianji pillar. Only by doing so will it be more convenient to travel between the 2 worlds. In today's blood-refining realm, Jiao Wanchang was the one who did the same thing. Because Pang Huanin did not have a divine sense, she did not have a unique advantage in reconnaissance. I activated my power and condensed my clones. I put on the Scarlet Dragon battle armor and the sword gourd for them and split them into 2 different directions. I finished surveying the area 100,000 kilometers away. Apart from the Spirit Sea realm cultivators, Qin Yu, Kong Niu, Ruan Lingyu and the others were not here. Obviously, we are here to take over the duty of guarding the blood-refining boundary. On the side of Wrestle Paradise, the cultivators of the various minor Tao palaces gradually left, with Purple Myrtle Jiao Xian and the people of Blue Blood sect leading the way. With Jiao Wan's current ability, there really isn't anyone in the entire blood-refining realm who can threaten me. After surveying the situation of Blue Blood sect, I went to survey the territory of Purple Myrtle Luyi. I too underscore the situation of other people's charred bowls is the same. Sect Master said, it's just a matter of convenience. Wrestle Paradise was now empty. The vampires were all dead, and the cultivators of the 4 provinces had all left. Only Sect Master was left. Ever since Jiao Wan advanced to Pang Huanin's level, the spirit and the tiger had been eager to cultivate. They did not want the gap between them and Sect Master to be too small. Now that they were only 1 step away from the Spirit Sea realm, it was obvious that they had to return to the 4 provinces to prepare for their advancement. If the Tao palaces wanted to stand tall or fall, they would have to have a backup force that could continue to develop. This kind of backup force would definitely have a gap at a certain stage, which would have a very small impact on Jiao Wan's development. The villages where the human race gathered were the source of the Blue Blood sect's reserve of talents. Sect Master said with a smile, "You've worked hard all your life. Let this disciple take care of such important matters." Jiao Xian's true body and clones set out together, carefully walking through every hill. He memorized the terrain and the various mineral and medicinal reserves he had scouted. At the same time, he also recorded the locations of the human villages in the area. Currently, the blood refinement realm was in an intense state. Without the vampires stirring up trouble, the remaining humans all lived in peace and contentment. Perhaps the last time they saw the spirit and the tiger, they would not have been reborn. Of course, that mainly depended on Hupo. He was Hupo's frustrated spirit, and her strength depended on Hupo's growth. 1. Once Lan Qiue became a disciple of the Blue Blood sect, the Blue Blood sect would no longer have 7 Spirit Sea realm cultivators. If Yun Xuechu was included, it would be 7. That number was not considered a lot. Within the borders of the 4 provinces, in the Tianji halls of the small Tao palaces, the Tianji pillars trembled. Unfamiliar figures returned and auras appeared one after another. The cultivators who stayed behind hurriedly came to investigate and welcome the meritorious guests. It was certain that the cultivators of the 4 provinces who used the Tianji pillars to teleport back to the blood refinement realm didn't consume a certain degree of the resources of the 4 provinces. Returning from the blood refinement realm to the 4 provinces at that time could be said to be negligible, but it was still very little. In addition, in the process of investigating, they also had to draw a map. The Jade Blood Sect's territory was very small at that time, so they definitely didn't have a precise map to guide them. In the past, when the Jade Blood Sect cultivators came to the blood refinement realm to mine mineral resources or do other things, it was still very convenient. Chapter 1190. Some of the first batch of cultivators who joined the Jade Blood Sect had already reached the True Lake realm, and they had also participated in the previous expedition. Compared to the other sects of the 9 states, the losses of the Jade Blood Sect and the Zi-Wei Dao Palace in the expedition were negligible. Lan Qiyu's cultivation wasn't too high among the Spirit Sea realm cultivators because she was assisting in the extermination of the blood race. However, the suppression of the divine attribute was fatal to the blood race. Therefore, in the process of exterminating the blood race, the 2 sects were basically unstoppable. The responsibility of overseeing a branch sect was great, and the sects that could afford it generally chose to have a Spirit Sea realm cultivator overseeing them. The Jade Blood Sect didn't have this condition for the time being because there weren't many Spirit Sea realm cultivators, so they could only send out True Lake realm cultivators, which was barely enough, but it would be a little more difficult. Cloud River realm cultivators weren't suitable for this task. Firstly, their cultivation wasn't enough, and secondly, their speed was too slow. The territory of 100,000 kilometers was too big, and once something happened, it would take a lot of time just to travel. Kong Nyo and the other 2 had a lot of things to do next. At the very least, they had to let the humans in the territory of the branch sect know that the Jade Blood Sect was open to them, and those with enough aptitude could be recruited and go to the 9 states to study under a master. In addition, they had to organize people to mine the mineral deposits. Of course, these things were carried out as sect missions, and they would be rewarded with abundant cultivation materials. After 1 or 2 years, the sect would send people to replace them, so it wouldn't delay their cultivation too much. This was the general process. Lu Yi exchanged a few words with the 3 and chatted with Pang Huanin before returning to the 9 states through the Heaven's Fate Pillar. He appeared in the Jade Blood Sect's Heaven's Fate Hall. As soon as he returned to the 9 states, he faintly noticed some slight abnormalities. Because of the level of the world, cultivators above the Spirit Sea realm couldn't be born in the 9 states. It was also for this reason that after a cultivator reached the Spirit Sea realm, it would become more and more difficult for them to improve their cultivation. This was also the reason why many cultivators were stuck in the 6th, 7th, and 8th order Divine Sea realm for many years without being able to advance. It wasn't that their talent wasn't enough, nor was it because of the lack of cultivation resources, but because of the constraints of the world. In truth, Lu Yi also had this feeling. Although his cultivation was rapidly progressing, after reaching the Divine Sea realm, he could clearly feel some invisible binding force. The higher his cultivation, the stronger this binding force became. However, because his foundation was too solid and he had the talent tree, although he could feel the binding force, it did not affect his advancement too much. But after returning this time, he clearly felt that the invisible binding force had weakened. This was undoubtedly the result of the 9 regions devouring the foundation of the blood-refining world to strengthen themselves. If Yang Kai could feel it so clearly as a 6th-order Divine Sea cultivator, then the 9th-order Divine Sea cultivators would definitely feel it even more clearly, because the world shackles were the most intense to them. As a result, the Divine Sea realm cultivators in the 9 states, especially those in the 9th order, were all in high spirits and full of anticipation. He also finally confirmed that Lu Ye's words about the world's heritage that day were not empty. At the celebration banquet for the end of the insect plague, Lu Yi threw out shocking remarks in front of everyone. Although it was shocking, there was no conclusive evidence after all. In the end, whether things were as Lu Yi said, no one could guarantee. Moreover, The situation at that time was that the blood refining world was rapidly approaching the 9 regions, so the cultivators could not delve into it and could only seek self-preservation to deal with the blood refining world's attack. When the blood refining world was pacified and the cultivators returned to the 9 regions, they immediately noticed the difference. As a result, they were overjoyed. The cultivators who were born in this era were extremely lucky. In the later 9 regions era, there was no lack of talented cultivators, but because of the restrictions of the environment, they could only be trapped in the divine sea realm for the rest of their lives. There were many who could not break through. In this era, the cultivators of the 9 regions were finally imitating their ancient ancestors and rushing out of the world that gave birth to them. Domains step into the starry sky. Whether it was a blessing or a curse, no one knew, but a cultivator's life was always about moving forward. They also had the instinct to pursue higher cultivation realms. Even if it was not in this era, they would eventually step onto the big stage of the starry sky. This was something that the shackles of any world could not stop. Lu Yi returned to the Jade Blood sect and spent a few days in peace. A few days later, under the leadership of the sect master, he went to Haotian City. There was no other reason. For the great victory of the expedition to the blood refining world, the 9 regions had prepared a celebratory banquet. In fact, before Lu Yi returned, the cultivators of the 9 regions were already preparing. The reason why they waited until today was to wait for Lu Ye's return. It was undeniable that the expedition to the blood refining world, whether it was the early preparations or the follow-up expedition, Lu Yi had contributed a lot. Especially in the process of killing the holy seed, Lu Yi had contributed a lot. If the biggest contributor did not participate in the celebratory banquet, it would be somewhat unreasonable and would make the banquet lose its luster. In addition, the last celebratory banquet ended without a result. This time, the 9 regions could be said to be wantonly organized. When the time came, the number of people at the grand banquet might be several times more than last time. It was not only a celebratory banquet, but also a grand banquet for the leaders of the major sects in the 9 regions to gather together to discuss the future. The original structure of the 9 regions had been broken. In the future, the 2 camps of the Haotian Alliance and the Myriad Devil Ridge would get along with each other. Although there was some tacit understanding at the moment, there were still many places to discuss. Before the new structure was formed, there would inevitably be many places to run in. Bow on the side of the Jade Blood sect, only the sect master and Lu Yi came. Shui Yuan did not like this kind of lively environment, so she did not come. Lan Qiue, on the other hand, had just arrived in the 9 regions. In addition, as a member of the blood race, it was not appropriate for her to show her face in public. 3 Haotian City was already overcrowded. The Spirit Sea realm cultivators from the major sects in the 9 regions gathered together, chatting and laughing. Because of the desire for the future upper realm, coupled with the sincere cooperation before and after 2 times, the 2 camps were very strong. When they met, the atmosphere was harmonious and they talked and laughed. Not long after Lu Yi and the sect master arrived, the grand banquet began. From this point of view, the sect master came at the right time. The gathering of cultivators was not so complicated. As the leader of the Haotian Alliance in the military province, Pang Zhen went on stage and made a brief speech. The last sentence was a conclusion: everyone eat and drink well. Today we will not go home until we are drunk. The atmosphere suddenly became lively. On the huge square, the tables were filled with exquisite fruits and delicacies, which were basically specialties from the blood refining realm. Figures shuttled back and forth, removing the empty plates and pots, and serving new wine and delicacies. The whole square was bustling as if it was a market in the mortal world. Those old seniors with top strength were all present, and they were arranged at the top position. There were constantly cultivators going to toast them. Lu Ye's side was also lively. Some came to thank him for his help in the expedition to the blood refining realm, and some came to make friends with him. Everyone knew that he was the person who was the most favored in this era. It could be said that this era was his era, and even Feng Wujiang of the previous era couldn't be compared to him. Naturally, they couldn't neglect him. Whether it was useful or not, they had to get familiar with him first. Until a certain moment, A figure walked over shakily with a wine glass in his hand. His face was red, and it seemed that he had drunk a lot. Lu Yi hurriedly stood up. "How could I trouble you, senior? I should be the one toasting you." It was Wu Chang. Beside Lu Yi, the sect master also stood up. Wu Chang smiled and pressed his hand, then sat down across the table without any care for his image. After Lu Yi and the head teacher took their seats again, Wu Chang opened his mouth and said, "They all put on the airs of a senior, but this old man doesn't care. I came here to ask, what is the future of our cultivators? Is there anything I need to pay attention to? What is the realm above the divine sea realm?" As soon as he said this, the nearby noise suddenly subsided, and then the area of silence became larger and larger. In just a moment, the huge square was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. What Wu Chang wanted to know was also what all the Divine Sea Realm cultivators present wanted to know. The Divine Sea Realm had always been the limit of the cultivation world of the 9 provinces. No one knew what was above the Divine Sea Realm, and there were no seniors to learn from. For the current cultivation world of the 9 provinces, it was tantamount to crossing the river by feeling the stones. At this time, if someone could enlighten them, it would definitely benefit the entire cultivation world. Lu Yi was surprised. "Why is senior asking me? This junior is only a 6th-order Divine Sea Realm cultivator." Wu Chang glared at him. "Don't play dumb with this old master. Heaven's secret often gives you special treatment. Do you think we old guys are blind? If there is anyone in this world who knows anything about the Divine Sea Realm, it's only you, little brat. If you can explain, then say a few words. If you can't or don't know, then just pretend this old master didn't ask." Everyone agreed with these words, and immediately, pairs of eager eyes looked over. Lu Yi was helpless. He seemed to be unconsciously touching the battlefield mark, but in fact he was communicating with Xiaojiu. He did have some understanding of what Wu Chang was asking. He had heard it all from little Jiu. In the later 9 states, the cultivation path of cultivators stopped at the Divine Sea, and they were confused about what was above the Divine Sea. However, this was not the case in the early 9 states. Little Jiu was refined by the mighty figures of the 9 states in the early 9 states, so he was naturally not unfamiliar with cultivation. However, this kind of matter related to the future of the 9 provinces should not be publicized by him, nor did he need to, because when the time came, the cultivators who met the requirements would naturally sense it. If not, he would have already told the sect master and eldest senior brother about this. But now, it seemed that the top masters of the 9 provinces were obviously a little impatient, so Wu Chang came to ask him about it. With so many people watching, it would be inexcusable if he did not give an explanation. Moreover, this was not something that could not be said, but Lu Yi still wanted to ask Xiaojiu's opinion. Soon Xiaojiu responded, "Yes." Chapter 1191. In the square of Haotian City, under the gaze of tens of thousands of people, Lu Yi opened his mouth and said, "I don't know much about the upper realm. I can only tell you some of the current situation. Please forgive me." After a little consideration for his words, he continued, "The cultivation of cultivators should be divided into 2 steps. One step is inside the realm, and the other step is outside the realm. There is no need to elaborate on the cultivation situation inside the realm. You are all experienced and naturally know that what we cultivators of the 9 states have to face now is the cultivation outside the realm. But the cultivation of cultivators is related to the realm they are born in. If the realm's foundation is not enough and its level is not enough, it is impossible for the group of cultivators to walk out of the realm and step into the starry sky. This is both a kind of restriction and also the realm's protection for the cultivators." Wu Chang was puzzled. "What do you mean?" He could understand the restriction because so far, no matter how the cultivators of the Divine Sea Realm flew, they could not leave the world of the 9 states. Often, when they flew to a limit, they could not fly any higher. As for the protection, they had never felt it before. Because the starry sky is filled with countless invisible and extremely dangerous energies. These energies are everywhere and cannot be resisted by the cultivators of the Divine Sea Realm. Therefore, if a cultivator of the Divine Sea Realm rashly wandered into the starry sky, I am afraid that he will die in a moment." Everyone's expression froze when they heard this. Some of the cultivators who had tried to fly out of the 9 states secretly rejoiced that they had not succeeded that day. Otherwise, if they had really rushed out of the 9 states and into the starry sky, they would have died a long time ago. If this was the case, from this point of view, the inability of cultivators of the Divine Sea realm to walk out of the realm was really a kind of protection of the realm. Therefore, if cultivators of the Divine Sea realm want to go further, they must first obtain the power to connect with the starry sky. In this way, after advancing to the next realm, they can freely travel in the starry sky. During this period of time, the foundation of the 9 states has been improving. Presumably, many of you have felt that the bottleneck that has shackled you for many years has begun to loosen. Perhaps some of you have already tried to break through, but I want to remind you that the breakthrough now will not succeed, and it is not the best time. Only when you obtain the power to connect with the starry sky can you really make a breakthrough and then have the ability to travel in the starry sky. Someone asked, "How can we obtain the power to connect with the starry sky?" Lu Yi said, "I'm not too sure about the specifics of how to obtain it for the time being, but it's most likely going to come from our realm. However, the growth of a cultivator is through various methods of cultivation, while the growth of a realm is through the absorption of the invisible forces that are everywhere in the starry sky. Therefore, basically, every intact realm is in a state of growth. Of course, devouring the heritage of other realms is also a way, and the growth is faster. This is the current situation of the 9 regions. When the accumulation of a domain reaches a certain level, a heavenly secret will probably descend. At that time, you seniors will naturally know what to do." Wu Chang, who was sitting in front of Lu Yi, glanced at him leisurely. He wasn't sure if Lu Yi really didn't know, or if he just didn't want to say it out loud. But now that the answer was clear enough, there was no need to get to the bottom of it. Let's talk about the realms above the Divine Sea. Lu Yi paused for a moment before speaking again. "Just now, I said that the cultivation of cultivators can be summarized into 2 steps. The first step is the inner realm, the second step is the outer realm and the inner realm. The 4 realms of Spirit Stream, Cloud River, True Lake, and Divine Sea are the lower 4 realms. As for the outer realm, as far as this junior knows, it is divided into 3 realms, namely Constellation, Moon Jade, and Sunshine, which are the upper 3 realms. In ancient times, these 7 realms were collectively called the lower 4 realms and the upper 3 realms. Everyone listened attentively, and no one asked how Lu Yi knew about the division of realms in ancient times. Just as Wu Chang said, the heavenly secret often gave Lu Yi special treatment, so it seemed normal for him to know some things that the world didn't know. It was also at this moment that a new door on the road of cultivation slowly opened in front of the cultivators of the 9 regions, causing their hearts to palpitate and their blood to boil. The cultivation of a cultivator is ultimately based on oneself. The cultivation of the lower 4 realms lies in the opening of the cultivator's essence, energy, and spirit. It is the same in the upper 3 realms. The 3 realms of the upper 3 realms correspond to a person's essence, energy, and spirit. For example, the constellation realm corresponds to a person's essence, and the essence of essence is one's qi and blood. If one's qi and blood are strong, one's physique will be strong. This is also in line with the main point of a cultivator rushing out of the boundary and setting foot into the starry sky, because only with a strong enough physique can one be qualified to travel through the starry sky. It is said, it is only said that even if a cultivator of the constellation realm loses an arm or a leg, they can still grow it back. As soon as these words came out, the audience went into an uproar. Things like regrowing a broken limb were too illusory. At the very least, the current Divine Sea realm cultivators absolutely did not have this kind of ability, and the 9 regions also did not have such an effect. When cultivators fought with others, they would often have misgivings about causing irreversible damage to their bodies. However, if they could regrow a broken limb, then they could ignore many restrictions, and the battle would inevitably be more dangerous. This news was truly explosive and also fascinating. Especially the cultivators who had been injured in battle, they could not help but yearn for it. If they could advance to the constellation realm, wouldn't they be able to make up for their own shortcomings? Yuji's leisurely voice floated from a certain direction. As you said, the constellation realm corresponds to a person's essence, then the Jade Moon realm corresponds to a person's chi, and the Sunshine realm corresponds to a person's spirit? Exactly. If the lower four realms are the opening of a cultivator's essence, energy, and spirit, then the upper three realms are the expansion and extension of the essence, energy, and spirit. In the end, a cultivator's cultivation must be cultivated to the extreme. Everyone silently nodded. This was also in line with the principle of cultivator's cultivation, which was to prioritize the person. Among the sects such as beast taming and yenshur were destined to be unable to carry forward because they placed too much emphasis on external strength. Of course, there were extremely few people who could reach a very high level, but in the end, they were only exceptions and could not represent the entire sect. Then when we reach the constellation realm, wouldn't everyone be a body cultivator? Someone asked. If what Lu Yi said was true, then the constellation realm was the expansion and extension of a person's essence, then what was the point of the other sects existing? Naturally it's not that simple, but what kind of mysteries there are, and what kind of impact the sect's own ideals will encounter in the process of reaching the upper realm, this is not something that this junior can understand. Seniors will naturally understand after reaching the upper realm. However, there is one thing that this junior knows: no matter how few body cultivators there are, you can't lie to me. Naturally, I won't lie to the city lord about this kind of thing. History seemed to be repeating itself. The previous celebration banquet after the insect disaster ended with Lu Yi throwing out an important piece of news, and this time, it was the same. The difference was that the previous celebration banquet ended up being a mobilization before the 9 Regions War, but this time, it was more like a spiritual assembly. A spiritual assembly led by Lu Yi. The Divine Sea Realm cultivators present, regardless of their seniority, cultivation strength, or origin, all had all kinds of questions about the upper realm. In the following period of time, there were constantly people asking questions. Lu Yi could only try his best to answer. Although he knew a lot of things that ordinary people didn't know when he chatted with Xiaojiao, his knowledge was limited, and there were many things that he couldn't answer. However, no one felt that there was anything wrong with it. The celebration banquet ended without a cause, so be it. For cultivators, nothing was more important than reaching the upper realm. Now that the foundation of the 9 regions was increasing, the cultivation of the Divine Sea Realm cultivators would also become easier and easier. Who didn't want to go further? It wasn't until half a day later, when there were no more questions, that the Divine Sea Realm cultivators let Lu Yi go. They probably also saw that everything Lu Yi knew had been emptied out. Lu Yi finally had some leisure time, but the Divine Sea Realm cultivators were not idle. They were still discussing the many possibilities of the future in groups of 3 or 5. Everyone was particularly enthusiastic about how cultivators could obtain the power to connect with the starry sky, because Lu Yi didn't give a clear answer to this matter. The celebration banquet lasted for 3 days and 3 nights, and it came to an end in a lively and expectant atmosphere. Many cultivators scattered, and Lu Yi returned to the Jade Blood sect with the sect master, accompanied by Wu Cheng. Lu Yi was speechless. "Senior, you're really something else." Yi Kai returned to the 9 regions. "Why didn't you go see your old friends? Why did you follow this junior?" Wu Cheng laughed and said, "This old man is so old, how could I have any old friends? Only those old guys from the Jade Blood Holy Land. This old man is a rogue cultivator, without any sect or sect. Wherever I go is my home. What's wrong with going to your Jade Blood sect? Am I not welcome?" "Welcome, welcome. How could I not welcome you?" Lu Yi probably knew what he was thinking. He felt that if he followed him, he might be able to get more information. As he said, in the 9 regions, wherever he went was his home. He didn't have any relatives or old friends to visit. Instead of wandering around, it was better to follow Lu Yi. As a result, the Jade Blood sect had one more guest. This was a good thing for the Jade Blood sect, because they could arrange for many disciples who wanted to walk the path of ghost cultivation to follow Wu Cheng. The cultivation of the disciples of the Jade Blood sect had always been a bit awkward, and that was, they didn't have a teacher. This was unlike other large sections. When the disciples entered the sect, They often had teachers from various factions to guide them. However, although the Jade Blood sect had developed well in recent years, they had never had a suitable teacher. This was also a common drawback of many developing sections. It wasn't that they couldn't cultivate on their own, but it was always more convenient to have someone to guide them on the path of cultivation. Chapter 1192. The sect master and Shui Yuan often taught the disciples, but their energy was limited and it was impossible for them to take care of everything. Moreover, because of the sect they cultivated, they knew nothing about the ghost cultivation Dao. Since Wu Chang was here, he was a ready-made top instructor. He didn't refuse this and even enjoyed interacting with the young people of the Blue Blood sect. Perhaps this was a way for an old man to regain his vitality. Although Wu Chang didn't look old from his appearance, he was no longer young. After the celebration banquet, the 9 regions was peaceful. Now, the cultivators of the 9 regions were basically busy digesting the gains from the expedition to the blood refining world, so they naturally didn't have the mood or time to cause trouble everywhere. But this didn't mean that the situation would remain like this in the future. After joining forces twice, the relationship between the 2 factions had improved greatly. However, it was impossible for cultivators to always get along so peacefully. As time went by, conflicts would inevitably erupt. When that happened, more conflicts would inevitably arise. However, the 2 camps had reached a consensus that there would be no more large-scale confrontations between the cultivators of the 2 camps in the 9 regions. Even if there were conflicts, they would be kept to a certain extent. In such a peaceful atmosphere, the cultivators of the Blue Blood Holy Land migrated to the 9 regions and chose to settle in the Weapon Province. This was understandable. Although the Blue Blood Holy Land was created by Feng Wujiang and many old seniors, Feng Wujiang was still the Holy Master. He was from the Weapon Province, so it was reasonable for the Blue Blood Holy Land to be settled in the Weapon Province. The foundation of the 9 regions was improving extremely quickly. The top masters felt this very clearly because as the foundation of the 9 regions improved, the bottleneck that had trapped them for many years became more and more loose. If it weren't for Lu Ye's words at the celebration banquet, many people would have entered secluded retreat to break through. But since Lu Ye had spoken in advance, everyone knew that it was useless to break through at this time, so they naturally didn't waste time and energy. So, they all waiting for the heaven's will to descend. While waiting, Lu Ye's cultivations steadily advanced to the 7th order Divine Sea realm. In the blood refining world, he had refined too much of the blood race's Saint Blood. Every drop of Saint Blood contained a huge amount of energy, which not only enhanced his own Saint attribute, but also increased his foundation. When he returned to the 9 states, he was not far from the 7th order, so this time's advancement was naturally a matter of course. The improvement of his cultivation was secondary. What made him the happiest was that his talent tree had started to change again. Originally, this conversion process should have started a few months ago, but in the process of refining the sacred blood in the blood refining realm, Lu Ye had used up too much of the talent tree's fuel and fire spirit stones, which naturally caused the conversion process to be delayed. When Lu Ye first obtained the talent tree, it could only burn the impurities in the energy he absorbed into his body, allowing him to cultivate without any worries. After the first mutation, the talent tree gained the ability to devour external energy. It could also split out a section of the talent tree root to help him condense a clone. This second metamorphosis came late, and Lu Ye was looking forward to seeing what would happen to the talent tree after the metamorphosis. At this very moment, inside his source aperture, the innate skill tree had already turned into a blazing seed. Presumably, this transformation process would take some time. He could only wait quietly. During this process, it would be difficult for him to cultivate, so he began to improve his way of formations and spirit inscriptions. When his cultivation was not high, both his way of formations and spirit inscriptions would increase with his cultivation. However, as his cultivation gradually increased, he no longer had the time to spend on these 2 skills. It was not that he did not want to, but that he did not have the time. He could use the process of the innate skill tree's metamorphosis to make up for it. His way of spirit inscriptions went without saying. Right now, his way of spirit inscriptions might not have been as good as his master Yun Xuechu's, but his master could not teach him a lot anymore. Most of the time, he would compare and discuss with his master, improving together. As for the way of formations, his attainments in the way of formations came from his excellent foundation in the way of spirit inscriptions, as well as a gift from the 100 Formation Pagoda. As a result, Lu Yi was still very interested in the 100 Formation Pagoda. If he could find the third part of the 100 Formation Pagoda, then his attainments in the way of formations would definitely increase. It would be a tremendous increase. Unfortunately, no one knew where the third part of the 100 Formation Pagoda was located. People only knew that the bottommost part of the 100 Formation Pagoda was in the Heaven Expanse sect of the Mist Province, while the middle part was in the Battlefield of Clouds. No one seemed to have discovered the missing third part since ancient times. If he wanted to know about this, the best way was to ask Little Nine. Even though Little Nine often behaved in a businesslike manner towards him, reiterating several times that he could not give Lu Yi too much special treatment before he refined the Heavenly Secrets disc, he would still give Lu Yi preferential treatment frequently in reality. Impermanence and the many peak human powerhouses were right about this. This was because Little Nine knew that in this generation of cultivators, the only one he could rely on was Lu Yi. It was very likely that he would be the only one who had the right to refine the Heavenly Secrets disc in the future. From a certain perspective, Little Nine was a fusion of an artifact spirit and the will of the world, but he was not inflexible. He knew how to be flexible. The 100 Formation Pagoda? You can't find it. Many years have passed since the great human powerhouses of the 9 provinces used their great powers to shift me to this location. I may have concealed the existence of the 9 provinces, but there will always be some things that drift nearby, such as world fragments and the 100 Formation Pagoda. They drifted over, so I put them away. Back then, I only collected 2 parts of the 100 Formation Pagoda. The other part is nowhere to be found. Little Nine spoke like he was collecting junk. Lu Yi wanted to laugh a little when he heard that, but that was the truth. The world of the 9 provinces had stood in space for so many years, so there would always be things drifting nearby. Little Nine obviously would not collect useless things, but he would collect the useful ones. He really was collecting junk. The 100 Formation Pagoda was one of his gains. Once you have the right to roam space in the future, you might be able to find the final part of the 100 Formation Pagoda, but the chances are very slim. 1_1_ the universe was boundless. Who the hell knew where the other part of the 100 Formation Pagoda had drifted off to? It was basically hopeless for a person to search for a specific item in space, unless they had some special guidance. Lu Yi, do you think it's better to distribute the spirit jades to those who need them or let them fight over them? Little Nine suddenly threw out another question. Lu Yi did not understand. Spirit jades? What's that? 1_. It's the resources needed for cultivation after the Divine Sea Realm. It contains the power that allows a cultivator to connect with the universe. Lu Yi reacted. Cultivation in the constellation realm requires this? What about spirit stones? Heaven and earth spiritual energy? 1_. For cultivation after the Divine Sea Realm, spirit stones and ordinary heaven and earth spiritual energy are no longer of much use. Spirit jades are the crystallization of many energies in space, and are also the main means of cultivation for cultivators after the Divine Sea Realm. Only by refining the spirit jades when advancing to the constellation realm can a cultivator break through the Divine Sea Realm and leave the domain. 1_. In other words, this was the treasure that the top experts of the 9 provinces yearned for even in their dreams. Is this thing very rare? Lu Yi asked. It's not that it's rare, it's just that condensing it will consume the foundation of the domain. You also know that the growth of a domain, other than devouring the foundation of other domains, is through constantly absorbing the energy of the starry sky, slowly increasing over time. Therefore, the birth of every spirit jade is a consumption of the domain's foundation. Generally speaking, a world with a weak domain cannot produce spirit jades, because all the absorbed energy of the starry sky is used for the world's growth. This is the instinctive demand of the world. Only when the level of the world has grown to a certain extent, such as the current situation of the 9 provinces, will it have the qualifications to condense spirit jades. However, the amount cannot be too much or too frequent, otherwise it will affect the growth of the domain. If that's the case, then how can future cultivation be guaranteed? The energy of the starry sky is everywhere. Every domain and world can absorb it, so can cultivators. It's equivalent to the heaven and earth spiritual energy of the 9 provinces. However, the stage for you cultivators has changed from the small world of the 9 provinces to the large world of the starry sky. However, this method of cultivation is destined to not be very efficient. That's right. Take the current cultivators of the 9 provinces for example. There are many types of cultivation methods, such as inhaling and exhaling the heaven and earth spiritual energy, swallowing spirit pills, and using spirit stones. However, in comparison, the method of inhaling and exhaling the heaven and earth spiritual energy was the slowest to improve one's cultivation. Of course, this method was relatively safe and stable, and would not bring any hidden dangers to the cultivator. Unlike swallowing spirit pills, although the cultivation speed was fast, there would be pills. Poisonous sludge. After reaching the constellation realm, it was no longer inhaling the heaven and earth spiritual energy, but the energy of the starry sky in the starry sky. It was the same cultivation method, but the energy was different. If you want to increase the efficiency of cultivation, there will be the birth of spirit jades in the meteorites, dead stars, and even in the starry sky. It can even be said that in some powerful domains, there will be spirit jade mines. Cultivating in the starry sky, as long as you work hard enough, you will always be able to find it. At this point, little 9 sighed. In fact, strictly speaking, cultivators are like a group of blood-sucking insects to the domain. Only by sucking the blood of the domain's foundation can cultivators have the qualifications to set foot in the starry sky. Therefore, if you are going to die in the future, remember to die after returning to the 9 provinces. That way, all the benefits you have gained from here will be fed back. Lu Ye's face darkened. I'm only in my 20s, and Su Jiao is already looking forward to my death? Little 9, this fellow, was becoming more and more outrageous. Then how should I deal with it? Little 9 changed the topic and returned to the main topic. How did you deal with the previous 9 provinces? I'm not sure. The purpose of me being refined was to move the 9 provinces, and at that time, the will of the 9 provinces was not clear, so it would not discuss with anyone. Alright, the purpose of a cultivator's cultivation is to compete with others, to compete with the heavens. Only by competing can one go further. Alright. Then I'll listen to you. Alright. Please enter .com to view it in your browser. Chapter 1193. Little 9 had made up its mind. In fact, it never had a mind of its own. In the past, when it didn't show itself in front of others, no one would notice anything. However, since it revealed its true form in front of Lu Yi, its dependence on Lu Yi had become more and more serious. Many times, Lu Yi felt that it was not like an artifact spirit that had existed for tens of thousands of years, but more like a child that hadn't grown up yet. Perhaps for an artifact spirit, tens of thousands of years was just an infant stage? A few days later, on the Mingxin Peak, when Lu Yi and his master were studying the various transformations of the spiritual inscriptions, Yun Xuechu suddenly exclaimed softly. He flashed out of the palace and looked up at the sky. Lu Yi followed closely behind, feeling something in his heart. At the same time, on the Mingxin Peak, the sect master also looked up. In the entire 9 states, all the Divine Sea Realm cultivators who had reached a certain level of cultivation had a wonderful feeling at the same time. In the next moment, a spiritual light appeared in the sky. The spiritual light was not dazzling, but even from a distance, many Divine Sea Realm cultivators could see it clearly. The spiritual light was like a feather falling from the sky, falling straight toward a certain place in the 9 states. That was where the Force Province was located. Beside the sect master, Wu Chang laughed loudly. I'm going. As he finished speaking, he rushed into the sky and went straight toward the spiritual light. The sect master seemed to want to move, but in the end he restrained himself. A sword light rose from the North Mystery Sword sect. Jian Guhong became one with his sword, and his sword moved like thunder. In the Vitality sect, Meng Jie snorted and bent his body slightly. In the next moment, the smoke figure rushed out like an arrow, and the ground under his feet cracked. In various places in the war state, several figures rose into the sky and went toward the falling spiritual light. Not only the war state, but also the top powerhouses of the other 8 states heard the news and moved. In an instant, the wind and clouds rose. Everyone knew that the heavenly secret that Lu Yi mentioned before had arrived. This was also the key to breaking through the Divine Sea realm and becoming a constellation. In the current 9 states, there were many cultivators who were qualified to take this step, at least hundreds of them. After all, this was accumulated over a long period of time. Naturally, the number of people was not small. Take the Jade Blood sect, for example. The sect master and Yun Shuechu were qualified to take this step. However, there was a tacit understanding among the cultivators this time that only the old seniors from the Jade Blood Holy Land had come. For example, the sect master, Yun Shuechu, Pang Zhen, Long Bo, and the others, even though their hearts were itching, they did not interfere in this competition. It wasn't just because he knew that he couldn't compete with these old seniors whose strength had reached the peak of perfection. It was also a form of etiquette. Respecting the old and loving the young was a good tradition that needed to be maintained. Moreover, in terms of age, these old seniors were indeed more urgent than others to take this step. For example, if Granny Jiao didn't quickly advance, she might really exhaust her lifespan and die of old age in the 9 regions. In the newly established Jade Blood Holy Land, Feng Wujiang gazed at the spiritual light in the sky, not moving at all. Qiu Min was a little uneasy as she whispered, "You're not going?" Feng Wujiang smiled and held her hand tightly. "I'm not going. When you need to take this step one day, I will grab 2, 1 for each of us." He had already missed out on a few decades, and now was the time to make it up to his wife and children. Therefore, even if the spiritual light was extremely tempting to him, he believed that if he really went to fight for this kind of thing, and whether or not S was willing to fight with him, even if they really fought, no one would be able to do it. His opponent. Qiu Min leaned on Feng Wujiang's shoulder, her eyes full of happiness as she smiled sweetly. Before the spiritual light landed, a fierce battle broke out in the sky. Although they had been together for decades, no one was willing to back down and endure in front of such an opportunity. Since that was the case, they could only fight for it. No one knew the exact process of the battle. It was too far away, and the scene was too chaotic. Even with the eyesight of the Divine Sea realm, they couldn't see it clearly. In less than an hour, the dust settled. It was so fast that it was over before the experts from the other continents could arrive. Impermanence flew back with a bruised nose and swollen face. His clothes were tattered, and he seemed to have suffered a sword wound. As he flew, he cursed, "Old man, sword lunatic, you really showed no mercy. I was really blind to have been friends with such a person for decades. A sword cultivator deserves to be alone for the rest of his life, without friends." He looked flustered and exasperated. Lu Yi knew that it was very likely that Jian Guhong had succeeded this time. As expected, among the seniors in the war province, if the eldest senior brother Feng Wujiang didn't take action, Jian Guhong was undoubtedly the strongest. Not to mention that Impermanence, a ghost cultivator, couldn't take advantage of him in a head-on confrontation. Even a body cultivator like Meng Jie had to be careful of his flying sword at all times. If another day passed, an extremely clear and pleasant sword sound suddenly came from the direction of the heavenly mountain. Everyone in the war province heard it clearly. Then he returned. In this kind of confrontation, against his side who had the best skills, the other factions also had the best skills and skills. All of them were not ordinary at all. Ghost cultivators, armament cultivators, body cultivators, and spirit cultivators were all extraordinary. After returning to Blue Blood sect, Wu Chang immediately found an ownerless spirit peak and began to cultivate. In less than a day he emerged. 4 old seniors like them who had been accumulating experience in the 9th Order Divine Sea realm for countless years, what they lacked was the key to taking the next step. The spiritual lights condensed by little 9 were the key, so once they succeeded, it wouldn't take long. It wouldn't take much time for them to break through. On top of the green bamboo peak, Wu Chang found Lu Yi, who was inspecting his talent tree. When they met face to face, Lu Yi couldn't help but marvel. Because they hadn't seen each other for only a day, Wu Chang obviously looked much younger. If Wu Chang's appearance before was that of a mortal in his 40s, now he looked like he was in his 30s. This was an obvious change, but it wasn't obvious. Lu Yi could sense that Wu Chang's body contained an astonishing amount of power. In the past, although Wu Chang's strength was stronger than his, Lu Yi could still feel it. In other words, the gap between their strengths wasn't too big. But after Wu Chang broke through, this gap was obviously opened up. Congratulations, Senior, for achieving your wish and advancing to the Star Mansion realm. Lu Yi congratulated. Wu Chang's smile was so wide that it reached his ears. He was all alone. For example, Tang Yifeng didn't even show off in front of Lu Yi about the 6 fated chances that he had broken through with Han Xiao. It wasn't good for him to show off in front of Lu Yi. Hence, he specially ran over to Lu Yi to show off. He just wanted to hear a few congratulatory words to satisfy himself. How does Senior feel now? Lu Yi was actually a little curious about the difference between the Star Mansion realm and the Spirit Sea realm. It's hard to say, but my body has indeed become more vigorous. It seems that what you said before about the Star Mansion realm corresponding to the essence of a person is true. This old master also feels that cultivation in this realm is mainly about improving one's essence. However, what you said about regrowing severed limbs doesn't seem very reliable. At the very least, this old master doesn't have the ability to do so right now. Lu Yi smiled and said, "That's because Senior has just advanced to the Star Mansion realm. When your cultivation reaches a higher level in the future, you will probably be able to do such a thing." Wu Chang nodded. "What you said is possible. Senior, are you ready to set off?" "Naturally, after waiting for so many years, I finally have this opportunity now. Of course, I should go and see the splendor of the starry sky. Otherwise, wouldn't I always be a frog at the bottom of a well?" He mysteriously approached Lu Yi and whispered, "Is there anything you want to tell me?" He looked like he wanted Lu Yi to tell him if he had any inside information. It was no wonder that Wu Chang thought so. After all, traveling the starry sky was just the beginning for the cultivators of the 9 regions. No one knew what they needed to pay attention to, so they could only explore on their own. However, since Lu Yi knew about the upper 3 realms, maybe he knew something that others didn't know. Wu Chang was also used to being careful, so he wouldn't lose a piece of meat by asking more. Chapter 1194. Lu Yi laughed. "How could this junior have anything to say to Senior? I can only wish for Senior's future to be smooth and bright." "You little brat, you're not being honest." Wu Chang looked at him angrily and waved his hand. "Forget it, if you don't want to say it then don't say it. This old master will know what the future holds once he sees it for himself." Wu Chang had left. Recently, the old vassals of 9 regions had left one after another. Some went alone, while others went together. Their yearning for the starry sky and their instinctive desire made them choose to leave as soon as possible after their ascension. They were the first pioneers of the 9 states, so their journey was bound to be fraught with danger. But cultivators were like this. Although it was safe to be trapped in a corner, it was not what they wanted. Lu Yi wasn't far from this step. He was now a 7th-order Divine Sea Realm cultivator, and with his cultivation speed, it wouldn't be long before he could take this step. However, his focus now was not on his cultivation, but on his talent tree. Sky Blue Tree Sei's second brother had finished transforming into Fan, or after no bird passed when Hua his vice brother pulled Wen and Zia Xinjian. Once again, it transformed into a Xiong Yen Ge Big Feather. Ba Lao Shangguan, Sky Blue Tree Sei's hand did not undergo any major transformations. Lu Yi was dreaming in his heart, and the Sky Blue Tree must have undergone some changes that he did not realize. As for what kind of auspicious change it had undergone, Sanda Mancha could only guess. The first time it had undergone a transformation, it was this auspicious change. After a while, Lu Yen determined that the Heavenly Blessing River's current energy source had withered. In other words, the length of the sky blue tree's roots had increased. For him, this was a good thing. By increasing the length of the talent tree's roots, it meant that the efficiency of the talent tree's absorption of external forces had increased. If it was in the past, he wouldn't be able to devour the energy hidden deep underground because the roots of the innate skill tree couldn't reach too deep. But now he could. As long as he could devour the energy within a certain range, he could devour it to his heart's content with the power of the innate skill tree. He condensed another clone. Originally, he thought that after the second transformation of the talent tree, perhaps Fei would split into Jiao Lung and Di Ning would form 2 more clones. But that was not the case. There was only one root of the Tianxi tree that could be divided into different arts, but it was so light that it could no longer be called a root. It was another piece of heaven. Matching tree, there were many fake cases where the entire Tian murder tree was split into 2. When the wheat was split like this, even the heavenly sin tree's reserve materials were split into 2. This solved a problem, which was the problem of the clone not being able to cultivate for a long time. In the past, because the avatar did not have the fuel of the Tianzi tree, it could only use double southern spirit stones to replenish itself whenever it expended its energy in battle. This method was not very efficient, and it was not as efficient as the main body. Whenever the main body expended too much energy in battle, it could easily consume spirit pills to replenish itself. However, now that the innate skill tree had undergone a second transformation, the doppelganger would undoubtedly possess the same abilities as Ben Berry. In the future, the doppelganger would also be able to consume spirit pills to recover without having to worry about the accumulation of pill poison. If that was all there was to it, it might not bring Lu Yi many benefits. But from another perspective, it was different. The clone could cultivate and so could the main body. When the main body took back the clone, it could quickly integrate all the abilities in the clone. Immeasurable. This meant that if Lu Yi was willing, the main body and the clone could cultivate together, and then have double the cultivation efficiency. This was quite terrifying, because his cultivation efficiency was already high enough. If it became double, the efficiency would probably break through the sky. Of course, to Lu Yi, this change was not very significant, because although cultivators paid attention to efficiency, there was also a limit. Being too efficient was not necessarily a good thing, and it could easily lead to an unstable foundation. Therefore, Lu Ye's cultivation was generally controlled by the rhythm. Without affecting his foundation in the early stages, he would try to improve his cultivation as quickly as possible and not pursue efficiency endlessly. If he really wanted to pursue efficiency endlessly, he would have already reached the 9th order divine sea realm. He had the ability to do so. The transformation of the clone did not have any practical significance to Lu Yi. Instead, it added even more risks. In the past, the clone only had a section of the Heaven Thief tree's root. Even if the clone was lost, it would only be a section of the root. But now that the clone was lost, it was equivalent to losing half of the innate skill tree. The loss was huge. These were the only changes that Go had discovered. There must be other changes that had not been discovered, and these all required follow-up research and observation. The transformation of the innate skill tree had almost consumed all the fuel reserves, so Lu Yi could only quickly replenish them. He still had a large surplus of fire spirit stones, so he did not have to worry about this for the time being. Days passed, and in less than a month, the old seniors who had once served the Blue Blood Holy Land in the 9 states had all reached the constellation realm. They left the 9 states and entered the starry sky. The only one who stayed was eldest senior brother Feng Wujiang. In terms of age, he was still young, so he was not in a hurry to break through. In addition, he wanted to make up for the pain of being separated from his master Mu for several decades, so he was not in a hurry to leave the 9 states. After the old seniors left, the next to compete were the cultivators at the level of the sect master, Pang Zhen, and Long Bo. Although they were not as strong as Jian Guji and the others in the Spirit Sea realm, they were still qualified to take that step. However, their competition was much more peaceful than Wu Chang and the others. After all, everyone was on good terms and did not like to fight too much. They all stopped at a certain point. There were also those who could restrain themselves and continue to wait. For example, Yun Xuechu had almost no intention of participating in the competition. Overall, the most important thing in the 9 states right now was the spiritual light that could allow cultivators to break through to the spirit sea realm and ascend to the constellation realm. In the sky above the various continents, there would often be sounds of fighting. Whether it was mortals or cultivators, they were all used to it. The 9 states was extremely lively, and so was the outside. Ever since the powerful cultivators of the 9 states refined the Heaven's Secrets Plate and used the Heaven's Secrets Plate to move the 9 states to the current star field, there were almost no precedents for cultivators to set foot here. After countless years of accumulation, the cultivation resources in this star field were still very abundant. The drifting meteorites, the dead stars near the 9 states, and even the void, all had spiritual jades condensed from the energy of the stars. It could be said that this star field was a completely undeveloped wilderness. As the first group to leave the 9 states and enter this star field, the cultivators of the 9 regions in the star field, almost all of them had gained a lot. They all knew that spiritual jades were resources that constellation realm cultivators needed for cultivation, so they were naturally searching for and collecting them. This group of people could almost be said to be in an environment where there were treasures everywhere. This was also the reason why so many people had left, but none of them had returned to the 9 regions. They were not too far away from the 9 regions. If they really wanted to go back, it would not take much time. However, now was a good time to search for cultivation resources. Who would waste time running back to the 9 regions? The first group of cultivators to leave the 9 regions was undoubtedly the most advantageous. Because they had drunk the first soup, when more and more cultivators left the 9 regions in the future, it would be difficult to find spiritual jades in this star field. After walking to the end of this crack and putting away the last spiritual jade that he had just found, Zhao Shoumu's body suddenly stiffened. He stared fixedly at the position directly in front of him. In an instant he had arrived. Please enter .com to view it in your browser. While he was healing, the starry sky energy had gathered towards him. Most of it had been swallowed and refined by Yang Kai, while a small part of it had gathered together and gradually condensed into spirit jades. He was only at a loss for a moment before he quickly came back to his senses. Although he was sure that he had escaped the pursuit of his enemies, however, it would not be good to expose it. Aiming in the direction that Zhao Shoumu had fled, he stretched out his hand and grasped at the air. In an instant, the surrounding stars dimmed slightly. At the same time, Zhao Shoumu, who was fleeing, realized in despair that he was clearly fleeing forward, but for some reason he was actually moving backward. He had no idea what had happened to him, but he knew that this strange scene had something to do with the mysterious young man. His heart was extremely sour. Sure enough, as he had guessed, the difference in cultivation between them was too great. Before he saw the young man with his own eyes, he could not sense his existence at all. Therefore, he had no idea what the young man had done. How fast he had fled just now was how fast he had returned. In just a few breaths of time, he had involuntarily returned to his original position. With his back facing the young man, his body was stiff and he did not dare to move. However, he was thinking rapidly in his heart. He was now in the constellation realm. Even if the young man's cultivation was higher than his by a whole realm, he probably could not use such a mysterious method. In other words, the young man's cultivation was most likely higher than his by more than a whole realm. This young man was at least a sunshine realm cultivator. Zhao Shoumu did not know whether to laugh or cry. Although he had cultivated for nearly 1,000 years, his state of mind was a mess at this moment. What kind of virtue and ability did he have? Not long after he left the 9 regions, he actually encountered such a powerful cultivator. Was he lucky or sorrowful? He sighed softly, turned around obediently, and bowed. Greetings, senior. Now that things had come to this, he became a hoodlum instead. The difference in cultivation was too great, so it was not wrong to be honest. Zhao Shoumu was startled again because the young man in front of him looked much paler than before. It seemed to be because he had used that mysterious method just now. He was seriously injured. He immediately came to this conclusion, but there were no distracting thoughts in his heart. The young man was at least a Sunshine Realm cultivator. Even if he was seriously injured, he could not do anything to him. An injured lion was still a lion, and it was not something that could be easily bullied. The young man looked at him with a faint smile and said softly, "Not running anymore?" "Very well." Zhao Shoumu was extremely honest. "I've embarrassed myself. I can't run anymore, so I won't run anymore." The young man nodded. A wise man submits to circumstances. "You're not bad." "Where is this?" Zhao Shoumu was stunned. "Senior, may I know where this is?" The young man flicked his finger, and Zhao Shoumu couldn't help but groan. He felt like he had been punched in the face, and he was dizzy for a moment. The young man's cold voice sounded. "Answer whatever I ask you." He really didn't know where this was. 100 years ago, he hid in the crack of this meteorite to heal his injuries, and drifted with the meteorite. 100 years had passed, and who knew where he had drifted to? One had to know that meteorites drifted very quickly in the starry sky. Zhao Shoumu's heart trembled. He knew that the young man was not a good-tempered person. This was just a small lesson, and he didn't know what the next time would be. He immediately said, "I don't know where this is either. I have just stepped into the starry sky and know nothing about the nearby star regions. As far as I know." He was telling the truth. None of the cultivators from Jiuzhou knew where this was, and they did not have any map of the starry sky to refer to. They had not formally interacted with the starry sky, and were still at the stage of figuring things out. "What? Didn't your elders tell you anything?" the young man asked. Zhao Shoumu shook his head. "No. In the 9 prefectures, this group of people was the most senior generation." "How troublesome." The young man's expression was impatient. "Let me see for myself." As he said this, he reached out to grab Zhao Shoumu. Although this movement was not fast, and Zhao Shoumu could see it clearly, he could not dodge at all. His body involuntarily fell down, and the young man grabbed his head. Under this mysterious power, Zhao Shoumu trembled like a sieve, his eyes trembling violently. He knew that the situation was bad, but even if he wanted to resist, he was powerless. For a time, he felt that the defenses of his soul had been broken and his divine sea was unstable. For some reason, he felt like he was being peeked at from the inside out. He understood what he had encountered. This was clearly a soul search. He was extremely miserable, and knew that his life was about to end here. He was unwilling to accept this. He had just ascended to a constellation and entered the starry sky, and he actually encountered such evil. The heavens were really blind, but no matter how unwilling he was, there was nothing he could do. The degree of being spied on became deeper and deeper, and his soul became more and more fragmented. Such a violent soul search could not reveal much, and most of it was just fragments of memories, but it caused indelible damage to the person whose soul was being searched. After a moment, the young man's eyes flashed, and he withdrew his hand. Zhao Shoumu slumped to the ground like a pile of mud. When he bumped into the young man's whereabouts, he was already doomed to die. The other party would never allow him to continue living, so as not to expose his whereabouts. Although the enemy might have given up on pursuing him, who could say for sure? For people of their realm, it was not strange that this pursuit lasted for hundreds of years. The information obtained from the soul search was not comprehensive, but it was not little either. At least he understood what he needed to know. Jiuzhou. The young man frowned, feeling like he had heard the name of this domain somewhere. Soon, his expression brightened. Could it be that domain? Domain. He faintly thought of a domain that existed in legends, a domain that once had countless powerful cultivators, a domain that was destroyed by the joint forces of many races because it was too powerful. He had lived long enough, so he knew some stars. If this 9 prefectures was really the 9 prefectures of the legends, then it would be too bizarre. After all, in the legends, the domain that was famous in the starry sky had been completely destroyed. Perhaps it was just the same name? And according to the information he obtained from the soul search, the overall level of this Jiuzhou had just reached the level of stepping into the starry sky. In the eyes of an expert like him, such a domain was not worth mentioning. His heart settled, It seemed that it was really just the same name. The starry sky was vast, and there were countless domains of the human race. It was not strange for the name to be the same. If this Jojo was really that Jojo, then it would be a huge problem if he killed the people of Jojo. Now, he only needed to face a group of cultivators whose strength was at most at the constellation level, and he naturally had no fear. With a sweep of his spiritual sense, he quickly sensed the existence of the Jojo. He was not very interested in a domain of this level. Once his cultivation reached a certain level, even if he was temperamental and ruthless, he would not be happy to be in a group of weak people. Showing off in front of him was a blessing, unless others provoked him. This kind of mentality was just like how an adult would not bully a child for no reason. There were no substantial benefits, and it only increased karma. Originally, it was just a casual survey, but he actually noticed something interesting. He immediately raised his eyes and used all his strength to look in the direction of the Jojo. He clicked his tongue in wonder. This is a growth-type domain? The current Jojo did not arouse his interest, but the current state of the Jojo had aroused his interest. This was because he could tell at a glance that the current Jojo was devouring the foundation of the blood-refining world, rapidly and significantly improving himself. Please enter .com to view the latest update in your browser. Chapter 1196. Normally speaking, all realms with living creatures could grow. These realms stretched across the starry sky, gathering and absorbing the ubiquitous starry sky energy to strengthen themselves and improve their world's foundation and level little by little. However, this process was actually very slow. Every time a world's level was upgraded, it would easily take hundreds of thousands or even millions of years. The higher the level of the world, the slower the upgrade. However, the starry sky was vast and full of wonders. There were always some special realms in this world. Realms could devour the foundation of other realms to improve themselves. This kind of realm was called a growth-type realm. It had abilities that ordinary realms did not have. In today's vast starry sky, most of the most powerful realms were growth-type realms. Because of its rarity, although the young man's realm was strong enough, it was not a growth-type realm. He had wandered the starry sky for so many years and had seen many realms, but this was the first time he had seen a growth-type realm. Such a realm was extremely precious, because once such a realm grew to a certain extent, it could even reach the level of producing spiritual jades in the realm. The reason why those top realms could constantly produce more experts was because they did not lack cultivation resources. Ordinary cultivators needed to search for spirit jades in the starry sky, which required a lot of time and effort, as well as many dangers. However, the cultivators of those great realms did not need to go through so much trouble. They had abundant spirit jade veins in their own realms, which could satisfy their cultivation needs. Of course, the realm called 9 regions in front of him was far from such a level. However, since it was a growth-type realm, as long as there were enough resources, it could reach that level sooner or later. Such a realm. This realm was extremely precious to a cultivator like him. Especially in this realm called 9 regions, there was no expert overseeing it. It was just a group of constellations that had just set foot in the starry sky. Once he arrived, he would be the ruler of the world, and no one would dare to disobey him. The young man could not help but laugh. It was really a blessing. 100 years ago, he was chased to the point of almost dying from serious injuries. He was forced to hide in the cracks of meteorites to fake his death to heal his injuries. When he woke up, he actually saw such a precious realm. Who could say for sure whether it was fate or luck? He spread his body, rose into the air, and rushed in the direction of 9 regions. At this time, he did not care whether his whereabouts would be exposed or not. Since he wanted to seize a realm, he could not hide his whereabouts. In that case, he would not be able to hide his whereabouts. Compared to the benefits he could obtain in the future, it was only right to take some risks. The meteorite he was hiding in exploded, and Zhao Shoumu's body turned into ashes in an instant. His body turned into a beam of light, and his power was magnificent. In the vicinity of the starry skies of the 9 provinces, There were currently several elites who had advanced to the constellation tier searching for spiritual jades. They were all astonished when they saw this streak of light shooting towards the 9 provinces from afar. This was because its speed was too fast, so fast that it exceeded their understanding. No one knew what had happened, and no one knew what the essence of the rainbow light was. They all looked at it, but in the next moment, their bodies trembled and their eyes stung. It was as if they had seen something they shouldn't have. Those who were closer to it even had blood flowing out of their eyes. Therefore, he knew that the essence of the rainbow light was a person, an extremely powerful cultivator, a cultivator that did not belong to the 9 regions. Of course, this was a small warning for young people. The cultivation world had many levels, and the barriers were awe-inspiring. Especially when walking in the starry skies, rashly looking at the whereabouts or details of others was an act of hostility. Even if the 9 regions cultivators were acting out of instinct at this moment, it was still not something that the young people could tolerate. If it were his previous thoughts, these cultivators who spied on his whereabouts should have been killed on the spot, so that they would know the consequences of offending their superiors. However, at this moment, since he was interested in the 9 regions, it was not good to kill them all. Perhaps in the future, these cultivators of the constellation tier would become his slaves, so keeping them alive would be of some use. The rainbow light rapidly approached the 9 regions. The constellation tier cultivators of the 9 regions were all shocked. They had just set foot in Chao Kong, and there were actually powerful people eyeing their realm? How could they tolerate this? Therefore, several people who were not far away touched each other with their divine thoughts, and they all turned around and returned to the 9 regions. Only one of them rushed out, but it was not to escape, but to inform the other constellation tier cultivators. When an evil guest came to their home, they naturally should greet them together. As for whether they were opponents, they would only know after fighting. In the War Province, Longbow got lucky the day before yesterday and snatched a bit of spiritual light. In a day's time, he had already advanced to the constellation tier. When he came out of seclusion, his laughter shook the heavens and the earth, and he swaggered into the sky, straight up to the 9 heavens. However, before he could rush out, the world suddenly shook, and an invisible pressure descended from the sky. The void in the entire 9 regions was slightly distorted. It was not that he was unlucky, but after UXN broke into the 9 regions, he scanned with his divine sense and realized that at this moment, Longbow was the strongest in this realm, so he naturally found him. If one wanted to control a realm, it was most effective to exert force from the top. As long as one controlled the power at the top, it was equivalent to controlling everything. Didn't hear clearly? UXN looked at Longbow indifferently, his eyes full of killing intent. Longbow immediately understood that if he said the word no, he would probably not be able to see the sun tomorrow. He had always been a flexible person, so he immediately nodded like he was pounding garlic. I heard clearly. Yes. UXN swung his hand and threw him to the side like he was throwing a rag. He raised his head and looked at the sky. With his strength, he could naturally clearly sense that there were a few constellation realm cultivators rushing over from outside the planet. They should be the few people who were spying on him from afar. He was well aware of their intentions, so he stood there quietly with his hands behind his back and waited. He knew that there was no need to deliberately look for anything. Since he was here, the peak experts of this realm would take the initiative to look for him, and he could take care of them all at once. Jade Blood Sect in the main sect, Lu Yi sat cross-legged on top of a green bamboo peak. In front of him, a golden vortex of spiritual power spun slowly and endlessly. The roots of the talent tree extended into it and madly devoured the pure energy within. He was in a state of cultivation. However, his cultivation had always been multitasking, so at this moment, other than cultivating, he was also observing the talent tree. After devouring the power of the fire spirit rock during this period of time, many new leaves on the talent tree were burning fiercely. However, what shocked him was that when his mind was immersed in these newly burning leaves, he actually did not obtain anything. This was something that had never happened before. In the past, every time a new leaf burned, he would either obtain a new spirit pattern or obtain a sense of the path of spirit patterns. This was the first time he had obtained nothing. Those burning new leaves were like blank sheets of paper. He was puzzled no matter how much he thought about it. He originally thought that there must be some profundity that he hadn't fully comprehended, but after a few rounds of investigation, he finally confirmed that these leaves really didn't carry anything. This was strange. However, Lu Yi faintly had a strange feeling. That was, he seemed to be able to construct spirit patterns on these new leaves that were as white as paper. He could even infuse his own comprehension of the path of spirit patterns into them. He suddenly understood. Could it be that the many spirit patterns on the talent tree, as well as his comprehension of the path of spirit patterns, came from this? He learned from Little Nine that he was not the only owner of the talent tree. Before him, there had been several people who had obtained the talent tree, but they had all died early. Moreover, the person who had brought the talent tree to the 9 regions was an extremely powerful expert. He had died because of his serious injuries. After that person died, the inheritance of the talent tree was left behind in the 9 regions. Please enter embark to view the latest update in your browser. Chapter 1197. Actually, Lu Yi had already guessed where the spiritual tattoos on the leaves of the talent tree and the various understandings of the spiritual tattoos came from. Putting aside the spirit runes themselves, just the insights. Since they were insights, they were naturally related to cultivators and spirit rune masters. It was the insights of someone who had once poured into the runes to benefit those who came after them. This was the logic behind the saying, "Predecessors plant trees for future generations to enjoy the shade." Therefore, the many insights were extremely mysterious and allowed Lu Yi to have a smooth journey in the path of spirit runes. However, not all the leaves on the talent tree bore the insights. There were many blank leaves. Or rather, these leaves used to bear the insights, but they gradually disappeared due to the passage of time. Ever since he obtained the talent tree, Lu Yi had been playing the role of a person who enjoyed the shade, enjoying the leftovers left behind by his predecessors. Now that the talent tree had undergone a second mutation, was he going to start planting trees too? In other words, if he could construct spirit runes on these blank leaves, he would be able to use them as he pleased in the future. If that was the case, it wouldn't be a bad thing for him. Instead, it would be a great thing. Although there were many types of spirit runes on the talent tree, they were still very limited. Some of the spirit runes that Lu Yi had read about in books didn't bear on the talent tree. For example, the void spirit rune that he had been longing for. He originally thought that there would definitely be some leaves on the talent tree that bore this spirit rune. As long as he continued to let the talent tree devour fire elemental energy, he would be able to obtain the void spirit rune sooner or later. But now, it seemed that the situation wasn't what he thought. If things were really as he thought, he could completely construct the void on the talent tree and then completely master it. He would be able to use this spirit rune as he pleased in battle. In the past, the talent tree's spirit runes were a kind of passive acceptance, and Lu Yi had no choice. But now, he could probably take the initiative to choose? Many thoughts surged in Lu Ye's mind. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. If that was the case, the benefits of the second mutation of the talent tree would be too great for him. As for whether it was true or not, he would know after giving it a try. Lu Yi immersed himself and began to construct the void spirit rune on those blank leaves. The void spirit rune was very complicated, and there were as many as thousands of changes in yin and yang. It wasn't something that a single leaf could bear. Lu Yi estimated that he would need at least a dozen leaves. Fortunately, the number of new leaves burned this time was enough to meet the needs of the void. To him, this was not a difficult task because his success rate in constructing the void had always been very high, and there was rarely a possibility of failure. However, no matter how fast the construction was, it still required a certain amount of time, so he could not use it in battle. On the first leaf, many yin and yang elements spread out and intertwined with each other. Lu Yi suddenly entered a state of emptiness. Many inspirations burst forth in his mind. It was as if the whole world had become a world of only yin and yang elements. These two elements were constantly changing and combining, allowing him to see countless changes and possibilities. The first leaf was quickly covered with yin and yang, followed by the second leaf. The third leaf, Lu Yi was completely immersed in it and could not extricate himself. He did not notice the changes in his body at the moment. The so-called 2 ears out of the window was probably the best description of him at the moment. In the process of the opening of the talent tree's leaves, Lu Yi had gained a lot of insights and magical uses of the Tao of Spirit runes. He thought that he had already thoroughly grasped these insights and magical uses, but in fact he had only dabbled in them. After all, they were left behind by many predecessors. No matter how deep he understood them, they were still the things of others. But at this moment, these insights and magical uses had really turned into his own foundation. It was also in this state of selflessness that his understanding of the Tao of Spirit runes reached a higher level, causing the collision of many inspirations in his mind to erupt. The spread of yin and yang elements was not continuous, but under Lu Ye's control, it sometimes grew and sometimes disappeared. Inside, the strength of his divine soul was about to be overdrawn, which showed how terrifying the consumption of constructing the spirit runes on the talent tree's leaves was. The simple construction would not consume so much. The key was the bizarre state he was in when he constructed the spirit runes. He quickly took out a drop of soul-washing water and swallowed it. Then he closed his eyes and concentrated on comprehending what had happened just now. The state he was in just now was obviously abnormal. When he constructed the spirit runes, the second transformation of the talent tree seemed to have a wonderful guiding effect, which led him to deduce and perceive the changes of the spirit runes. The way of spiritual tattoos was unpredictable. There was not only one way to construct a spiritual tattoo. Some methods required more yin and yang elements, some required less, some were faster, and some were more effective. It could be said that during the construction process, any change in basic elements could change a spiritual tattoo beyond recognition, or its effect would be greatly enhanced. Deduce new spirit runes was the favorite thing of those spiritual tattooists after they reached a certain level of attainment. Master Yun Xuechu often deduced spirit runes when he was in closed-door training. It was because of the continuous research and deduction of many spiritual tattooists that there were various kinds of spirit runes in the cultivation world. Spirit runes could be used. However, the birth of a new spirit rune was not so easy. Any spiritual tattooist who could deduce a new spirit rune in his lifetime would be famous in history. Lu Yi had never thought of deducing a new spirit rune. It was too time-consuming and laborious. He was a weapon cultivator. After all, cultivation was based on himself. The Tao of Spirit runes was just an auxiliary. Perhaps one day when his cultivation reached a certain level, he would have the leisure to do this. However, what he should do now was to improve his cultivation as soon as possible instead of wasting time on the Tao of Spirit runes. He had never thought of doing this, but just now he did it unconsciously. Obviously, it was not because of himself. Then, there was only one possibility. It was because of the second transformation of the talent tree. He felt it clearly. Perhaps he did not notice it at that time because his mind was empty. However, when he looked back, everything was clear at a glance. When he constructed the spirit runes on the blank leaf, the talent tree miraculously guided him to deduce, which consumed a lot of divine thoughts. In that state, his mind was filled with thoughts in an instant. At this moment, it was like he was painting on the leaves of the talent tree. If there was something he was not satisfied with, he would wipe it off and start over again, trying to achieve perfection. In the process of wiping and changing, Lu Yi suddenly felt a pain in his mind. His whole person was suddenly freed from that empty state. Without him, the incomplete void spirit runes on the talent tree's leaves were difficult to continue. At this moment, the void spirit runes were only half finished. Lu Yi opened her eyes, seeing stars in front of her eyes. There was an unprecedented sense of weakness in her body, as if she had been hollowed out. Thinking about it, he immediately understood what had happened. His spirit sea was about to dry up. In other words, his spiritual energy had been severely consumed, almost to the point of overdraft. Lu Yi was shocked. One had to know that he was now a 7th-order divine sea cultivator, and he had taken a lot of soul-cleansing water. Therefore, in terms of spiritual energy alone, he was not inferior to any of the old seniors of the 9 provinces. Even so, in this short period of less than half a day, his thoughts and possibilities had changed, which was why his spiritual energy was greatly depleted. In such a state, he would instinctively choose a more accurate and effective yin and yang construction method to achieve the goal of simplifying a complex spirit rune and improving its effectiveness. The most direct evidence of this was the half-finished void spirit rune on the talent tree. This spiritual tattoo was not completed, but when Lu Yi looked at the part that had been constructed, he could clearly see that this part was different from the void spiritual tattoo that he had learned from the book before in many details. For the time being, it had become a little more condensed. There were at least 100 foundation elements. As for the effect, because it had not been completed, it was impossible to compare. A spirit rune that had been passed down for a long time had lost 100 foundation elements. This was an extremely terrifying result. This meant that the spirit rune had improved greatly. If Lu Yi was willing to promote this completed spirit rune, it would be much easier for spirit rune masters to construct void spirit runes in the future. The talent tree has such a wonderful effect. Lu Yi was amazed. Originally, after the talent tree completed the second transformation, he thought that the change this time would not be so big. Who would have thought that the talent tree would have such an amazing change? This was only a half-finished spirit rune. What would be the effect if the deduction was completed? If the void spirit rune could be like this, what about other spirit runes? Lu Yi suddenly felt that he seemed to have opened the door to a new world. For the time being, the change of the talent tree did not seem to bring him any substantial benefits. But if he looked at it from a long-term perspective, it would be of great use to the improvement of his way of spirit runes. He couldn't wait to enter that state again and complete the deduction and construction of void spirit runes. But even if he took the soul-washing water, it was not so easy to completely recover with his powerful divine soul. He could only wait. At this moment, a loud noise suddenly came from a certain direction, accompanied by the shaking of the whole world. Lu Yi was shocked. He flashed out and stood in the air to look. He didn't see anything because the source of the sound should be very far away. But it gave him the feeling that someone was fighting over there. This made him very puzzled. The current 9 provinces was relatively peaceful. The old seniors had all been promoted to Constellation Mansion and went to explore the starry sky. Cultivators at the level of Sect Master Longbow were also leaving one after another. Who was fighting over what, and why was the commotion so big? Why don't you ask Little 9? Bao Lu Yi immediately raised his hand and touched the battlefield imprint, calling softly, Little 9. In the past, every time he called, Little 9 would immediately respond. Chapter 1198. Little 9 was the heavenly mystery of the 9 prefectures and was everywhere. It could be said that as long as Lu Yi was in the 9 prefectures, he could contact at any time. However, Little 9 did not respond at all. Losing contact with the heavenly mystery was even more ridiculous. Lu Yi did not know what had happened to Little 9. Right now, the 9 prefectures were devouring the blood refinement realm to improve themselves. Perhaps something had happened in the process? This inevitably made Lu Yi worried. If something had happened because of the devouring of the blood refinement realm, the impact on the 9 prefectures would be huge. However, he could not help in this matter and did not know how to help. He could only wait for Little 9 to contact him. As for who was fighting in the 9 prefectures and causing such a huge commotion, he could only go and see for himself. When he leapt up, the headmaster's figure also rushed out from the front. The two of them looked at each other and nodded in tacit understanding. Then, they continued to fly forward. However, not long after they flew out, Lu Ye's battlefield imprint suddenly moved. At the same time, the sect master was also checking the battlefield imprint. It was obvious that someone had sent him a message. Before Lu Yi could check it clearly, Little 9's voice sounded in his ear. It was slightly panicked. Lu Yi, trouble has happened. Ever since he met Little 9 had always given him the feeling that it had a card up its sleeve. It had never panicked like this before. It was as if it had encountered something extremely fearful. What happened? Lu Yi asked. A very powerful person has come to the 9 prefectures. He seems to have set his sights on the 9 prefectures and wants to take this region for himself. Lu Ye's expression turned cold. How powerful? He should be in the Sunshine Realm. Lu Yi staggered and almost fell from the sky. Sunshine Realm? Are you sure? Of course not. I sensed him the moment he came to the 9 prefectures, Little Nine vowed. Lu Yi immediately understood that this matter was troublesome. The current cultivators of the 9 prefectures had just ascended to the constellation realm and stepped into the starry sky. Above the constellation realm was Yu Yao, and after that was Sunshine. There was a difference of 2 realms between them. One had to know that the higher the realm, the more difficult it was for a cultivator. The difference between the Constellation Realm and Sunshine was even greater than the difference between Cloud River Realm and Spirit Ocean Realm. A Spirit Ocean Realm cultivator could easily destroy countless Cloud River tier cultivators. And Sunshine Realm cultivators could kill all the new Constellation Realm cultivators of the 9 prefectures. How could this be? Although Lu Yi had long known that the starry sky was full of dangers and capable people came forth in large numbers, the 9 regions had just connected with the starry sky. How could they have provoked such a powerful person? Wasn't this luck was a little too bad? Little 9 was 9 prefectures had a constellation realm cultivators. Xiao Jiao said, rather than calling it a battle, it would be better to call it a one-sided suppression. The constellation tier elites who had left previously, aside from a few who had run far away, had basically all rushed back, but even with several dozen of them working together, they were still defeated with a single palm strike. If the other party was from the Moon Jade realm, and there was a difference of 1 major realm between them, perhaps they could still rely on numbers to deal with him. However, the difference of 2 major realms was like the difference between heaven and earth. Did anyone die? No one died. Since 9 prefectures caught that person's eye, he wouldn't kill for no reason. He only displayed his strength a little to make those constellation realm cultivators realize the truth. Little 9 paused for a moment, then continued, this person is injured. He had been hiding on a meteorite to heal his injuries. He drifted here with the meteorite, but this time, he was awakened by a person called Zhao Shoumu, and then he discovered the 9 prefectures. Zhao Shoumu? Lu Yi had some impression of him. After he ascended to Spirit Ocean Realm in the Blood Refinement Realm, dozens of old seniors took turns to train him. Zhao Shoumu was one of them. How is Senior Zhao? He's dead. He died after that person used a soul-searching technique. Lu Ye's heart sank. These old seniors of the 9 prefectures were lucky to live in this era. They waited for the level of the world to rise, and finally obtain the opportunity to ascend to the constellation realm and step into the starry sky. But now, someone was killed before he could go far. Lu Yi had heard of soul-searching techniques, but it seemed that no one in the 9 prefectures would use such an evil technique. Perhaps it was because their cultivation was not high enough. But Lu Yi understood that the person whose soul was searched would have to endure extreme terror and torture before dying. Why would this Sunshine Realm cultivator set his eyes on the 9 prefectures? Lu Yi was puzzled. Logically speaking, such an expert shouldn't have set his eyes on the 9 prefectures. There were no benefits here that could tempt him, unless he was a violent person who took pleasure in killing. But from the information he had obtained, that didn't seem to be the case. Because if he wanted to, those Constellation Realm cultivators who rushed back from the starry sky would all die. He probably saw the 9 prefectures devouring the Blood Refinement Realm, so he knew that the 9 prefectures could grow rapidly. That's why he was tempted. What do you mean? Lu Yi didn't understand. I told you before that when some realms grow to a certain extent, spirit jade veins will appear in the realm. Although he's in the Sunshine Realm, he still needs spirit jade. Rather than spending time and effort to slowly search for them in the vast starry sky, he might as well occupy a realm and wait for it to grow to the point where spirit jade veins can appear. Then he can harvest them easily. How long will that take? Lu Yi couldn't understand what this expert was thinking. He's in the Sunshine Realm, so he can afford to wait. Moreover, a rapidly growing realm like the 9 prefectures is extremely attractive to people like him. He can use the 9 prefectures as a foundation to create a world of his own and develop a force of his own. No matter what, he has already set his eyes on the 9 prefectures and won't leave easily. That was why little Jiao said that trouble was coming. The 9 prefectures were unlucky. If it had been a few years later, the meteorite where Yu Xian was hiding might have been far away from the 9 prefectures. No one would have found the meteorite and he wouldn't have been alarmed. But at this time, the 9 prefectures' world level had increased and someone had advanced to the constellation realm. At this time, the meteorite where he was hiding was destined to be discovered by the constellation realm cultivators of the 9 prefectures. If it wasn't Zhao Shoumu, it would be someone else. Where is that person now? He left. After displaying his absolute strength, he suddenly left. However, he will definitely return. I don't know what he's doing. Lu Yi came to a realization. You were hiding before? No wonder he couldn't contact little Jiao. It turned out that little Jiao had sensed that something was wrong and hid its existence. It only took the initiative to contact Lu Yi after the expert left. He is eyeing the 9 prefectures because of his desire. If he finds my body, he will definitely find a way to refine it. At that time, the foundation of the 9 prefectures will be shaken, so I can't be detected by him no matter what. If Yu Xian really discovered the existence of the Heaven's Fate Plate, it would inevitably be a disaster for the 9 prefectures. Because little Jiao was the fusion of the Heaven's Fate Plate's artifact spirit and the will of the 9 prefectures. Once it was refined by Yu Xian, the foundation of the 9 prefectures would inevitably be greatly damaged. Not only would there be no possibility of growth, perhaps even the current world level would fall. Fortunately, little Jiao had never shown itself in front of others. If the truth of the Heaven's fate was known by the cultivators of the 9 prefectures, Yu Xian would definitely be able to see through it. At present, other than Lu Yi, only the city lord of the immortal origin city knew the true face of little Jiao. Therefore, this secret would not be leaked out for the time being and little Jiao was safe for the time being. Lu Yi suddenly remembered something. He broke into the 9 prefectures. Why didn't you send down the heavenly punishment to deal with him? When he first invaded the blood refinement realm, the heavenly punishment of the blood refinement realm immediately descended. If he had not cleverly entered the blood refinement realm and refined the energy of the blood refinement realm, he would definitely have turned into ashes under the might of the heavenly punishment. Little Jiao's voice was a little worried. Do you think I don't want to? I really can't do it. The might of the heavenly punishment is directly related to the level of the world. Right now, if an outsider of the constellation realm were to break into the 9 prefectures, he would definitely not be able to survive under the heavenly punishment. However, he is a sunshine realm cultivator. The heavenly punishment of the 9 prefectures is nothing to him and he can easily resist it. If the heavenly punishment were to descend, he might even be able to follow the vine to the melon and spy on me. Every world had a limit. The current limit of the 9 prefectures was the constellation realm. Therefore, under the heavenly punishment, the constellation realm cultivators would not be able to resist it. Even if an outsider of the Moonjade realm came, they would also be suppressed and threatened to a certain extent. This was the effect of the world's mighty power. However, the Sunshine Realm was truly beyond the limit of the 9 prefectures' suppression and threat. As a group of cultivators, when an individual's strength exceeded a certain limit, it could not be said that they could do whatever they wanted. Under certain circumstances, they could not be suppressed. Actually, there was another point that they should be more worried about. The existence of the 9 prefectures had been exposed because of Yu Xian. Because the cultivators of the 9 prefectures were strong enough, they had made countless enemies when they roamed the starry skies. In the end, they were surrounded by those powerful enemies and had no choice but to teleport away to avoid disaster. If the existence of the 9 prefectures was really exposed, it might attract even more enemies. Although it had been tens of thousands of years, hatred was not something that would be extinguished by the passage of time. Looking at the current situation, this was not a big problem. Yu Xian had the intention of the 9 prefectures, so naturally he would not spread it around. He would only do things secretly. He was probably afraid that the news would be leaked and that there would be experts coming to take a share of the profits. It was not that little Jiao and Lu Yi had not considered the various situations that might occur after the 9 prefectures and the starry skies were connected.